At my brother-in-law's $500,000 wedding, my mother-in-law dragged my 10-year-old daughter off the dance floor by her hair. "No child of a soldier ruins my son's day, get her out," she screamed right before pushing my little girl into a solid marble pillar. Blood poured down my daughter's face. 3 hours later, the police met me at the emergency room. 1 hour after that, my mother-in-law saw my Air Force dress blues and whispered they said a colonel was coming. "That is you." I am Abigail, 34 years old, and a mother who learned the hard way that family is not defined by blood or marriage rings. It is defined by who protects your child when the wolves bare their teeth. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who underestimated your worth and thought they could break you. The evening began in the grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. The ceiling dripped with crystal chandeliers, casting a warm golden glow over the 300 guests. It was supposed to be a celebration of love between Eric, my husband Jason's younger brother, and his beautiful bride Jasmine. Jasmine, an incredibly brilliant African-American forensic accountant, looked absolutely breathtaking in her custom silk gown. She and Eric were radiating happiness in the center of the room. But this night was never truly about them. For my mother-in-law, Brenda, a 60-year-old narcissist and the CEO of a mid-sized logistics company, this wedding was nothing more than a corporate networking event financed by her own vanity. Brenda had invited dozens of her business associates, private investors, and local politicians. She strutted around the venue in an inappropriate, heavily beaded silver gown that looked more like a wedding dress than the mother of the groom's attire. She treated the waitstaff like peasants and constantly loudly reminded everyone how much she had paid for the floral arrangements. I was sitting at a table near the back, keeping a low profile. As an active-duty military officer serving as a senior specialist in the Judge Advocate General Corps, I preferred to observe rather than be the center of attention. My husband Jason was somewhere near the open bar schmoozing with his mother's friends, desperate for her approval as always. Our 10-year-old daughter Lily was the flower girl. She was having the time of her life, twirling on the edge of the polished wooden dance floor in her little tulle dress. She was laughing, her face flushed with pure childhood joy. The jazz band transitioned into an upbeat tempo, and guests began moving toward the floor. Lily took a step backward to make room for an older couple. She did not see Brenda standing directly behind her holding a champagne flute and cornering a wealthy investor. Lily's small patent leather shoe accidentally stepped on the trailing hem of Brenda's silver gown. There was a faint sound of beads scraping against the floor. It was a minor misstep, the kind of accident that happens 100 times at any large gathering. A normal grandmother would have smiled, patted the child on the head, and moved on. But Brenda was not a normal grandmother. She was a woman who believed the world existed solely to serve her ego. Brenda spun around, her face instantly twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The champagne sloshed over the rim of her glass. She did not politely ask Lily to step back. She did not check to see if her granddaughter was okay. Instead, Brenda lunged forward and grabbed Lily by the upper arm, her manicured acrylic nails digging violently into my daughter's bare skin. Lily let out a sharp cry of surprise and pain. I was already out of my seat, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, my heart hammering in my chest. But before I could cross the distance, Brenda yanked my 10-year-old daughter violently to the side. The sheer force of the pull lifted Lily off her feet. "This dress cost more than your mother makes in a year, you clumsy little brat," Brenda hissed, her voice cutting through the music. "No child of a soldier ruins my son's day. Get her out." With a final vicious shove, Brenda pushed Lily away from her. The polished floor was slippery. Lily lost her balance, her arms flailing as she fell backward. I screamed her name, sprinting past startled guests, knocking a tray of glasses out of a waiter's hand. It all happened in a terrifying fraction of a second. Lily fell hard, her small body flying toward the edge of the dance floor, where massive decorative marble pillars stood holding towering floral centerpieces. There was a sickening hollow thud that echoed louder than the jazz band. Lily's head struck the sharp, unyielding edge of the marble pillar. She crumpled to the floor like a broken doll and lay completely still. The music abruptly stopped. A collective horrified gasp rippled through the ballroom. Time seemed to freeze. I dropped to my knees, sliding across the slick floor until I reached my daughter. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her face pale, and then the blood came. A thick, dark crimson stream poured from a deep gash near her hairline, instantly staining the pristine white collar of her flower girl dress. Lily finally opened her eyes and let out a piercing, agonizing scream that shattered whatever was left of the celebration. I pressed my bare hands against her wound, desperately trying to stem the bleeding. My own dress was quickly soaking through with her blood. I looked up, expecting my husband to be running toward us, expecting someone, anyone to help. Instead, I saw Brenda. She was brushing off her silver dress, looking down at us with an expression of sheer annoyance, as if my bleeding child was nothing more than a spilled drink on a rug. "Someone call an ambulance!" I screamed, my voice raw with terror and fury. "Call 911 right now!" Before anyone could dial their phones, heavy footsteps approached from behind me. It was Jason. Finally, I thought. My husband was here. Lily's father was here to protect us, to confront his mother, to take control of the nightmare. I was wrong. I was so completely, devastatingly wrong. Instead of dropping to his knees to comfort his sobbing, bleeding daughter, Jason stood towering over us. He did not ask if Lily was okay. He did not look at the blood pooling on the floor. His eyes were darting frantically around the room, making eye contact with Brenda's horrified corporate guests. Jason reached down, but not to help Lily. His large hand clamped shut around my bicep like a vice. His grip was bruising, forcing me to look up at him. His face was flushed with embarrassment, his jaw clenched tight. "Abigail, stop making a scene," Jason hissed under his breath, his voice laced with venom and panic. "Get up, you are ruining the reception." I stared at him in absolute disbelief. My hands were covered in our daughter's blood. She was trembling and sobbing in my lap, and my husband was worried about a scene. I tried to shake his hand off, but his grip only tightened, digging into my muscle. "Are you out of your mind?" I yelled back at him. "Your mother just pushed her into a wall. She needs a hospital. She has a head injury." Jason leaned down closer, his hot breath hitting my face. "Do not exaggerate, Abigail. Mother barely touched her. She tripped because she is clumsy just like you. Now pick her up and take her to the bathroom immediately. Clean up this mess. You are embarrassing Mother in front of the investors. Do you have any idea who is in this room? The base procurement colonel is supposed to arrive in an hour to sign a $50 million logistics contract with Mother. If you ruin this for us, I will never forgive you." The air left my lungs. The noise of the ballroom, the whispers of the guests, the crying of my daughter, it all faded into a dull ringing in my ears. In that exact moment, kneeling on a blood-stained floor, something inside me completely snapped. The illusion of my marriage shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I looked at the man I had spent years loving, the man I had compromised my own career for, the man I thought was my partner. He was not a partner. He was a coward, a weak, spineless extension of his narcissistic mother. He was willing to sacrifice the safety and health of his own child on the altar of Brenda's corporate ambitions. I did not cry. I did not scream back at him. The panic I felt just seconds ago evaporated, replaced by an icy, calculated military precision. My training kicked in. I was no longer a panicked mother. I was an officer facing an enemy threat. "Let go of my arm, Jason," I said. My voice was dangerously low, perfectly calm, and completely devoid of emotion. I said it with the kind of authority that makes soldiers stand at attention. Jason blinked momentarily, taken aback by the sudden shift in my tone. His grip loosened just enough for me to rip my arm away. I turned my attention back to Lily, pressing my blood-soaked palm firmly against her head wound. I said, "Call an ambulance," I commanded, projecting my voice across the room to the hotel staff. Before Jason could try to grab me again, a figure in a massive white wedding gown pushed forcefully past him. It was Jasmine, the bride. She did not hesitate for a single second. She dropped to her knees right beside me, completely ignoring the fact that Lily's blood was instantly staining the expensive silk of her wedding dress. She reached over and grabbed a heavy linen cloth from a nearby table, pulling it down along with the silverware, and pressed it over my hands to add pressure to Lily's wound. "I already told the manager to call 911, Jasmine said clearly, her voice strong and steady. "They are on their way." Brenda stepped forward, her face red with indignation. "Jasmine, get up this instant," Brenda snapped. "You are ruining your dress. This is a private family matter. You are not fully part of this family, yet do not get involved in this woman's dramatic performance." Jasmine did not even look up at Brenda. She kept her eyes focused entirely on Lily, stroking my daughter's cheek to keep her awake. "I would rather never be part of this family than stand by and watch a child bleed on the floor while you worry about a contract," Jasmine replied, her tone dripping with absolute disgust. Jason looked horrified. "Jasmine, please just let Abigail take her to the restroom," he pleaded, completely oblivious to how pathetic he sounded. "We cannot have an ambulance show up with the sirens blazing. The investors will leave." "I am taking my daughter to the hospital," I stated coldly, gathering Lily into my arms as the distant sound of sirens began to wail outside the hotel. "And Jason, do not bother following us. You have made it perfectly clear who your family is tonight." I stood up, holding my whimpering daughter tightly to my chest. I did not look back at Jason, who stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, looking like a lost little boy waiting for his mother to tell him what to do. I walked straight past Brenda, whose face was contorted in a mix of fury and panic. "Make sure you figure out how to pay that hospital bill with your miserable grunt salary," Brenda sneered loudly as I passed her, ensuring her wealthy friends could hear. "I have a real VIP to impress tonight. The military contract is mine, and your little stunt will not change that." I stopped for a fraction of a second. I turned my head and looked directly into Brenda's eyes. I did not curse at her. I did not threaten her. I just gave her a long, dead, calculating stare. She had absolutely no idea that the base procurement colonel she had been bragging about all night, the officer who held the final signature power over her precious $50 million logistics contract, was not some older man in a suit. It was me. I turned away and walked out the double doors of the grand ballroom, stepping into the cool night air as the ambulance pulled up. The paramedics rushed forward, taking Lily from my arms and laying her on the stretcher. As the ambulance doors closed behind us and the vehicle sped away toward the hospital, I reached into my purse with a blood-stained hand. I pulled out my encrypted military-issued phone. I did not text my husband. I texted my lawyer. The war had just begun, and they had absolutely no idea who they were fighting. At the hospital, the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room were a stark contrast to the golden chandeliers of the ballroom. Paramedics wheeled Lily through the sliding glass doors, shouting medical terms to the attending trauma nurses. I followed closely behind, my hands still sticky with dried blood. They moved her into Trauma Bay 3, drawing the heavy curtain and shutting me out. The waiting room was cold and smelled of antiseptic. I sat down on a hard plastic chair, pulling out my phone again. I had already messaged my civilian family lawyer to initiate an emergency divorce and custody filing. Now it was time to leverage my actual job. As a judge advocate general officer with a top-secret clearance, I had access to resources my mother-in-law could not even fathom. I typed a quick, secure message to Major Davis, my second-in-command at the base. I told him to pull the background files on Brenda's logistics company, specifically looking for any financial irregularities tied to her upcoming Department of Defense contract bid. Then I hit record on my smartwatch voice memo app. I knew Jason would show up eventually, and I needed every word he said documented. It took 45 minutes for my husband to arrive. He walked through the emergency room doors looking frustrated rather than terrified. His tuxedo jacket was draped over his arm, and his bow tie was undone. He did not rush to the reception desk to ask about his daughter. He looked around the waiting area, spotted me sitting alone in my blood-stained dress, and marched over with a deep scowl on his face. "Where is she?" Jason asked, his tone clipped. I stood up, crossing my arms. "She is in Trauma Bay 3 getting a CT scan and stitches. She has a severe concussion. They are monitoring her for a brain bleed. I spoke with flat robotic precision. Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. God. Abigail, this is a disaster. Mother is having a panic attack in the hotel suite. The investors left right after the ambulance pulled away. You completely humiliated us. I looked at him, letting the silence stretch. I wanted to see exactly how far he would dig his own grave. Are you seriously talking about the investors right now, Jason? Your mother assaulted your daughter. She pushed her into a marble pillar. Jason stepped closer, lowering his voice into that patronizing, gaslighting tone he always used when trying to manipulate me. Keep your voice down. Mother did not assault anyone. She was startled. She barely touched Lily. The kid is clumsy. She tripped over her own feet and hit her head. It was an accident. We are going to tell the doctors it was an accident. Do you understand me? We are not pressing charges and we are not making a police report. Mother has too much riding on this military contract to have some baseless scandal attached to her name. I glanced down at my wrist, ensuring the small red light on my watch was still recording. So, you want me to lie to the doctors? I asked calmly. I want you to protect this family, Jason snapped back. If you do not drop this ridiculous vendetta against Mother, she will destroy you. She has the best lawyers in the state. She could take Lily away from you. Do not test her, Abigail. Just agree that it was an accident. Before I could respond, the heavy glass doors of the emergency room slid open again. 2 local police officers walked in, their hands resting on their duty belts. They scanned the waiting room and walked directly toward us. Ma'am, are you Abigail? The taller officer asked, stopping in front of me. Yes, I am, I replied. The officer pulled out a small notepad. We received a call from a woman named Brenda. She reported a domestic disturbance at the Grand Hotel. She stated that you, her daughter-in-law, became unhinged during a wedding reception, physically shoved your own child into a wall to extort money from the family, and then fled the scene in an ambulance. I stared at the officer, perfectly still. Brenda had actually done it. She had filed a false police report to cover her own tracks, betting that her wealth and status would easily crush the word of a seemingly ordinary military wife. I looked at Jason. He did not look surprised. He knew she had made the call. Is this true, sir? The second officer asked, turning to Jason. Did your wife push your daughter? Jason looked at me, a flicker of cowardly hesitation in his eyes before he swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, officers. My wife has been struggling with mental health issues since her last deployment. She is unstable. My mother tried to stop her, but Abigail pushed Lily and then caused a massive scene to make it look like my mother's fault. The betrayal was absolute. It was so complete and vile that I actually felt a cold sense of peace wash over me. The final tie to this man was severed. I did not yell. I did not cry or defend myself. I just looked at the 2 officers and spoke with total clarity. Officers, my husband is lying. His mother pushed my daughter. Furthermore, my husband just attempted to coerce me into lying to medical staff to protect his mother's business interests. I have his entire confession recorded on my device right here. But you do not just have to take my word for it. Right on cue, the sliding doors opened for a 3rd time. Jasmine walked into the emergency room. She was still wearing her massive, beautiful wedding gown, though the skirt was now ruined by dirt and dried blood. She held a silver iPad tightly against her chest. Eric the groom was nowhere to be seen. Jasmine had left her own husband at the altar of their reception because she recognized toxicity when she saw it. Officers. Jasmine called out, her voice echoing in the quiet waiting area. She marched straight up to the group, completely ignoring Jason, who had gone entirely pale at the sight of her. I am the bride from the wedding where this incident occurred. I am also a certified forensic accountant, which means I do not trust anyone's word without receipts. Before I came here, I had a very direct conversation with the hotel security manager. I told him that if he did not hand over the ballroom security footage immediately, he would be named as an accessory in a child abuse lawsuit. Jasmine tapped the screen of the iPad and held it up for the 2 police officers to see. This is the 4K security footage from the ballroom. It has audio. Watch it. The officers leaned in. I watched their expressions shift from skepticism to absolute shock. The video was crystal clear. It showed Brenda grabbing Lily by the arm, violently jerking her aside and loudly saying, "No child of a soldier ruins my son's day." It showed the vicious shove. It showed Lily hitting the pillar. And most damning of all, it showed Jason standing less than 10 feet away, watching the entire thing happen and doing absolutely nothing to stop it. The taller officer let out a low breath and looked up from the screen, his eyes locking onto Jason. "Sir," the officer said, his voice now laced with deep disgust, "put your hands behind your back." Jason took a step backward, his hands raised in panic. "Wait. No. You do not understand. My mother is a very powerful woman. She is meeting with the base procurement colonel tonight. You cannot arrest me. You will ruin everything. You are being detained for providing false statements to law enforcement and obstructing an investigation into child abuse," the officer stated, grabbing Jason's wrist and swiftly locking a metal handcuff around it. "Your mother is next on our list." Jason looked at me, tears of panic streaming down his face. "Abigail, please tell them. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. Do not let them do this." I stepped closer to him, my voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut glass. "You chose your mother over your daughter, Jason. Now you can share a jail cell with her." As the officers led my weeping husband out the sliding doors, Jasmine handed me the iPad and pulled me into a tight hug. "She is going to be okay," Jasmine whispered fiercely. "The doctors told me at the desk Lily is awake and asking for you." I closed my eyes, letting out the first real breath I had taken in hours. "Thank you, Jasmine. You saved us tonight." Jasmine pulled back, a dangerous, beautiful smile spreading across her face. "We are not done yet, Abigail." While I was waiting for the footage to download, I took a quick look at the public financial filings for Brenda's logistics company. She is drowning in debt. That military contract is the only thing keeping her out of bankruptcy. I smiled back, feeling the heavy silver eagles of my colonel rank waiting for me in my dress uniform bag in the trunk of my car. "I know," I said softly, "and I am going to make sure she never gets it. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to go hold my daughter. After that, I have an appointment at the police precinct to formally introduce myself to my mother-in-law." I left Jasmine in the emergency room waiting area and walked back through the heavy doors to Trauma Bay 3. Lily was awake, her head bandaged securely, holding a small stuffed bear a nurse had given her. The doctor assured me the scan was clear. No brain bleed, just a severe concussion and 8 stitches. I kissed her forehead, promising I would be right back after taking care of some paperwork. I walked out of the hospital and into the cool night air, heading straight for my car. As I unlocked the doors, my mind flashed back to the exact moment the ambulance had arrived at the hotel earlier that evening. The memory played in my head with agonizing clarity. The paramedics had lifted the stretcher carrying my bleeding daughter into the back of the ambulance. I had climbed in right behind them. Just before the heavy rear doors swung shut, I looked back at the grand entrance of the hotel. Brenda was standing on the illuminated stone steps, flanked by her wealthy friends. She had crossed her arms over her ruined silver gown, her face twisted in a sneer of absolute superiority. "Pay the hospital bill with your miserable grunt salary," she had shouted, her voice carrying over the wail of the approaching sirens. "I have a real VIP to impress tonight. The base procurement colonel is arriving, and you will not ruin this for me." I had not screamed back. I had not cried. I had simply let my face go completely ice cold. As the ambulance doors locked into place, sealing me inside with the flashing red and blue lights, the transition from mother to military officer was instantaneous. While the emergency medical technician checked Lily's vitals, I reached into my purse and pulled out my encrypted military-issued phone. The silent plotting began right there in the back of the moving ambulance. My phone was not a standard commercial device. It had direct, secure access to the Department of Defense logistics database. With my daughter holding my other hand, I logged into the federal procurement portal. I searched for Brenda's corporate entity. Her company was scheduled to finalize a $50 million contract with the Air Force to provide transportation and supply chain management for the regional base. It was a deal that would save her failing business. I pulled up the digital approval form. As the senior judge advocate general officer and the final reviewing authority, my signature was the only thing standing between Brenda and that government money. I did not just decline the contract. I initiated a full moral character and security risk flag. I attached a preliminary note detailing a pending felony investigation for child endangerment and filing a false police report. With 3 taps on the screen, I locked her company out of the federal bidding system entirely. The silent plotting in that ambulance was not an act of revenge. It was the surgical execution of military justice. She wanted to mock my grunt salary while begging the military for millions. She was about to learn how the chain of command actually worked. I shook the memory away and opened the trunk of my car in the hospital parking lot. Inside lay my garment bag. I unzipped it to reveal my pristine United States Air Force dress blues. I stripped off my blood-stained formal dress in the parking garage and put on the uniform. I fastened the buttons. I adjusted the crisp collar. I pinned the silver eagles to my shoulders, representing the rank of a full bird colonel. Finally, I attached the Judge Advocate General insignia. I looked at my reflection in the car window. There was no trace of the exhausted, bleeding mother left. Only the colonel remained. I drove to the local police precinct, the engine of my car humming steadily in the quiet night. When I pulled into the precinct parking lot, I immediately recognized the sleek black luxury sedan parked out front. It belonged to Brenda's high-priced defense attorney. I walked toward the entrance, my polished black shoes clicking sharply against the concrete. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the precinct. The scene inside was exactly what I had expected. Brenda was standing at the front booking desk, completely unbothered by the fact that she had been arrested for child abuse. She was throwing an absolute tantrum, refusing to place her hands on the ink pad for fingerprinting. Her lawyer was standing beside her, arguing loudly with the desk sergeant about bail conditions. "I am not letting you take my fingerprints like some common street criminal," Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing off the cinderblock walls of the police station. "Do you have any idea who I am? My company is a major military contractor. The base procurement colonel is on his way here right now to personally vouch for me. When he arrives, you are all going to lose your badges. You will be directing traffic at elementary schools by tomorrow morning." The desk sergeant looked exhausted, rubbing his temples as he tried to process her paperwork. "Ma'am, I do not care if the President of the United States is on his way. You are being charged with felony child endangerment and filing a false police report. Put your fingers on the pad. My lawyer will have your job for this," Brenda threatened, leaning over the high counter. "Jason, my son, is already handling the situation. He will make sure my unhinged daughter-in-law drops these ridiculous charges. She is mentally unstable. The military broke her brain. She is a nobody." I stepped out of the shadows near the entrance and walked directly into the bright fluorescent light of the busy lobby. The sharp, authoritative click of my dress shoes immediately drew the desk sergeant's attention. He looked up at my rank insignia and froze. I stood directly behind her. "Now let us talk about that military contract, Brenda," I said calmly. Brenda spun around so fast, she nearly lost her footing. The arrogant sneer vanished from her face, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed expression of absolute terror. She stared at the silver eagles on my shoulders, her eyes darting to the Judge Advocate General insignia, and then finally to my face. The high-priced defense attorney standing next to her visibly swallowed hard, instinctively taking a half step away from his client. The desk sergeant stood at attention, recognizing the weight of my uniform. Brenda opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy sound came out. "You are the colonel," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "I am," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "And right now, I am the only thing standing between your logistics company and total financial ruin. But before we discuss how I just flagged your Department of Defense contract for a severe security risk, I want you to understand exactly why this is happening. I want you to hear what your son did at the hospital while you were busy trying to cover your tracks." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, linking it to the smartwatch still strapped to my wrist. I had briefly mentioned the recording to the police earlier, but I had not played the entire uncut version for them. I pressed play, and the sterile lobby of the precinct was suddenly filled with the audio of the emergency room. As the recording echoed off the cinderblock walls, my mind flashed back to the agonizing hours I had just spent in Trauma Bay 3. The emergency room assessment had been a nightmare. I stood by the hospital bed holding my 10-year-old daughter down while a trauma doctor named Dr. Evans meticulously cleaned the deep gash on her forehead. Lily had been sobbing, her small hands gripping my fingers so tightly her knuckles were white. The doctor had been grave. He explained that Lily had suffered a grade 2 concussion from the sheer force of her head striking the marble pillar. She required 8 stitches, and the local anesthetic involved multiple painful injections directly into her open wound. I had to watch my child writhe in pain, all because a grown woman threw a tantrum over a dress. The doctor had warned me about the signs of a traumatic brain injury. He told me I would have to wake Lily up every 2 hours for the next 2 days to ensure she was responsive. He handed me a stack of discharge papers detailing the severity of the head trauma. It was not a simple trip and fall, it was blunt force trauma. Just as the doctor had left the room to order a final scan, the curtain had been pulled back. Jason had walked in. The audio playing in the precinct now captured his exact words. He had not rushed to Lily's side. He had stood at the foot of the bed, smelling faintly of expensive scotch and cigar smoke from the hotel bar. He looked at the medical equipment, the blood-stained gauze, and my exhausted face. His first words were not to ask if his daughter was safe. His first words, clear as day on the recording, were, "Abigail, you need to fix this right now." In the precinct, Brenda closed her eyes as she heard her son's voice. The recording continued. I heard my own voice, calm and detached, asking him what he meant. Jason's voice grew desperate and commanding. He told me that his mother was having a breakdown because the investors were asking questions. He leaned in, and the microphone on my watch picked up every treacherous syllable. He tried to manipulate me into agreeing on a fabricated story. He said we needed to tell the doctors that Lily was running too fast, that her shoes were slippery, and that she tripped over her own feet. "I am not lying to a doctor, Jason," my recorded voice said. "Your mother pushed her." Then came the ultimate betrayal, the exact moment Jason dug his own grave. "Oh, come on," Jason scoffed on the recording, his voice dripping with condescension. "She barely pushed her. It was not that hard. Mother just wanted her out of the way." Lily lost her balance. "If you file a police report and say it was an assault, Mother will lose the military contract. You know she is meeting the base procurement colonel tonight. That contract is worth $50 million. Are you really going to destroy our family's financial future over a little bump on the head?" I stood in the police precinct watching the blood completely drain from Brenda's face as the recording laid bare the truth. Her son had admitted it. He had confessed on tape that she pushed Lily, acknowledging the act while trying to minimize it. It was not that hard, he had said, right after a doctor had just spent 30 minutes sewing our daughter's scalp back together. I stopped the playback. The silence in the precinct lobby was deafening. The desk sergeant was glaring at Brenda with a look of pure disgust. The defense attorney was staring at the floor, realizing his client had zero chance of winning this case. "A little bump on the head," I repeated softly, stepping closer to Brenda, until I was mere inches from her face. "My daughter has 8 stitches and a grade 2 concussion because of you. And your son tried to use his own child's injury to secure your business deal. He tried to gaslight a military officer into committing fraud." Brenda backed up until her shoulders hit the booking counter. "You cannot use that recording," she stammered frantically, looking at her lawyer. "That is an illegal recording. He did not consent to being recorded. Tell her she cannot use that in court." Her lawyer finally spoke, his voice dry and defeated. "We are in a one-party consent state, Brenda. The recording is entirely legal, and frankly, it is damning." I did not break eye contact with my mother-in-law. I wanted her to feel the exact level of helplessness my daughter had felt on that dance floor. "The recording is already in the hands of the district attorney," I informed her. "It is also attached to the security risk file I just submitted to the Department of Defense. You thought I was just a grunt. You thought my salary was miserable. You thought you held all the power because you wore an expensive dress and threw a lavish party." I leaned in closer, dropping my voice to a sharp, commanding whisper. "But real power does not need to scream in a ballroom. Real power is being the person who signs the papers. Your contract is dead, Brenda. Your company is blacklisted from every federal bid in the country. And by the time the IRS finishes looking into the financial irregularities my sister-in-law uncovered, you will not even be able to afford the silver dress you are wearing right now." Brenda let out a ragged gasp, her knees buckling slightly. She grabbed the edge of the counter to keep herself from collapsing onto the precinct floor. Everything she had built, everything she valued more than human life, was crumbling around her in real time. "Now," I said, turning my attention to the desk sergeant, "I believe you are about to fingerprint the prisoner. Please proceed. I have to get back to the hospital. My daughter needs me, and I have a divorce petition to finalize." I turned on my heel, the polished leather of my military shoes sounding sharp against the linoleum floor, and walked out of the precinct without looking back. Behind me, Brenda was sobbing loudly, her arrogant facade completely shattered by the reality of her ruined military contract. The cool night air felt incredibly refreshing as I stepped outside. I got into my car, the silver eagles on my shoulders catching the dim light of the street lamps, and started the engine. As I drove back to the hospital, the adrenaline began to level out, replaced by a cold and hard clarity. My mind replayed the events in the emergency room earlier that night. Before Jasmine had arrived with the security footage, Brenda had executed her master plan. She had called the police and filed a preemptive report. But it was not just a lie to avoid blame for pushing a child. It was a calculated, vicious assassination of my character. Brenda had told the dispatchers that I was an unstable, PTSD-ridden veteran who had violently shoved my own daughter in a hysterical fit to extort her wealthy family. She had tried to weaponize my military service. As a judge advocate general officer, I have represented and supported service members who genuinely suffer from trauma. To see Brenda use that very real struggle as a cheap weapon to send an innocent mother to prison made my blood run entirely cold. But the deepest cut had not come from Brenda. It had come from Jason. When those two local police officers had first entered the emergency room, my husband had stood shoulder to shoulder with them. He had nodded along to his mother's grotesque lies. He had looked the officers dead in the eye and confirmed that I was unhinged and a danger to our child. He was entirely willing to let the mother of his 10-year-old daughter be handcuffed, stripped of her rank, and locked in a jail cell, all to protect his mother's logistics company and his own trust fund. That level of betrayal was not something you could fix. It was terminal. My phone vibrated in the cup holder. I glanced at the screen. It was a voicemail notification from an unknown local number. I tapped play over the car's Bluetooth system. It was Jason using his one phone call from the county holding cell. "Abigail, please pick up," his voice whined through the speakers, sounding small and pathetic. "Baby, you have to fix this. It is freezing in here. Look, I am sorry about what I said to the police earlier, okay? Mother pressured me. You know how she gets. I was just trying to keep the peace so she could sign that military contract. But now they are charging me with filing a false report and obstruction. You have to tell them I was confused. Tell them I did not see what happened clearly. We are a family, Abigail. Do not let them do this to me over a stupid misunderstanding." I listened to a grown man blame his mommy for his own decision to frame his wife for child abuse. I did not delete the voicemail. I saved it directly to a secure cloud drive. It was just one more piece of evidence for the custody hearing. I parked at the hospital and hurried back up to the pediatric trauma wing. When I reached Trauma Bay 3, Jasmine was sitting in a chair right outside the door, still wearing her ruined wedding gown. She looked exhausted, but fiercely alert. She stood up as soon as she saw me, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of my full dress uniform. "You look like you just ended a war," Jasmine whispered, pulling me into a brief, tight hug. "I just started one," I replied softly. "How is my little girl?" Jasmine smiled warmly. "She is sleeping. The nurses said her vitals are perfect. Eric came by while you were gone. He brought Lily that stuffed bear she is holding. He also told the hotel staff to pack up his things. He is completely cutting off his mother and brother. He told me he refuses to be tied to people who would hurt a child and then lie to the police about it. We are done with them, Abigail. A throat cleared behind us. It was one of the police officers from earlier, the taller one who had arrested Jason. He held a clipboard in his hand. "Colonel," he said, his tone entirely different from the suspicious way he had addressed me earlier. He was respectful, highly professional, and clearly apologetic. "We have your husband in a holding cell downtown. His mother is being processed now. The district attorney wants to stack the charges, but we need your official written statement regarding the false police report they attempted to file against you tonight." I nodded, gesturing to a quiet corner of the waiting area. I sat down with the officer and detailed every single thing that had happened. I made sure to emphasize the specific terminology Brenda and Jason had used. I explained that falsely accusing an active duty judge advocate general officer of violent service-related mental instability was not just a local crime. It had federal implications regarding my security clearance. By attempting to ruin my military career with a fraudulent police report, they had elevated their own legal jeopardy significantly. The officer wrote furiously, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "Your husband actually thought he could get away with claiming you were extorting them," the officer muttered. "He practically threw himself on his sword for his mother's logistics company. He is about to find out that company is worthless," I stated flatly, signing the bottom of the statement. "Keep him in that holding cell as long as legally possible. I have a team of military lawyers drawing up a restraining order, and I do not want him anywhere near my house or my daughter when he finally posts bail." The officer took the clipboard. "You have my word, Colonel. We are not letting him out easily." I walked back into Lily's room. She looked so small in the hospital bed, the white bandage stark against her dark hair. I pulled a chair right up to the side of the bed and held her small, warm hand in mine. I watched her chest rise and fall steadily, feeling a fierce, protective instinct settle over me. My phone vibrated in my uniform pocket again. It was a secure message from Major Davis. I looked down at the secure message from Major Davis on my encrypted phone. The background check on Brenda's company was complete, and the forensic financial audit Jasmine had provided was entirely accurate. It was time to execute the financial guillotine. I stepped out of Lily's hospital room and walked over to the small waiting area where Jasmine was still sitting. Her ruined silk wedding gown billowed around the hard plastic chair. She was furiously typing on her silver iPad, her eyes scanning lines of data with absolute precision. I sat down next to her, letting the heavy reality of the night wash over me. I looked at this incredible woman, someone who was supposed to be dancing with her new husband, but was instead building a legal fortress to protect my child. "I need you to tell me exactly how you pulled this off," I said softly, my voice filled with profound gratitude. "Earlier tonight, when those two police officers were standing over me in the trauma bay, I really thought I was going to lose everything. Right at the terrifying moment when the taller officer actually attempted to read me my Miranda rights, you suddenly strode into the emergency room, holding that iPad like a weapon. You stopped a false arrest in its tracks. How did you get the evidence so fast?" Jasmine stopped typing and looked up at me, a fierce spark in her eyes. "As a forensic accountant, I deal with professional liars every single day, Abigail. When you left the hotel in that ambulance, I watched Brenda go into full damage control. She immediately started spinning her web of lies to her corporate investors, playing the victim, and your husband just stood there nodding along like an obedient lapdog." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her grip tightening on the tablet. "I ditched my own wedding reception right then and there. I ripped off my veil and marched straight down to the hotel's security office. I was not about to let that woman destroy a mother and child just to save a business deal." I listened intently, amazed by her sheer determination. "What happened when you got to the security office?" I asked. The hotel manager tried to block the door. Jasmine explained, a sharp smile forming on her lips. "He gave me a rehearsed speech about guest privacy and needing a subpoena. I did not have time for his bureaucratic nonsense. I stepped right into his personal space, looked him dead in the eye, and told him that a 10-year-old child had just suffered a severe head trauma on his property due to a deliberate, malicious assault." Jasmine tapped the back of her iPad for emphasis. "I told him I was a certified forensic auditor and that I was already taking notes." I explicitly explained that if he deliberately withheld the 4K security footage from the ballroom, I would personally ensure he was named as a co-conspirator and an accessory to child abuse in a massive federal lawsuit. I could not help but smile, picturing the terrified manager facing down a furious bride. I am guessing he cooperated after that, I said. He caved in less than 2 minutes. Jasmine laughed dryly. He bypassed all the corporate red tape and downloaded the raw, unedited video files directly onto my device. The footage was perfect. It captured every single angle of Brenda grabbing Lily, shoving her, and Jason watching it happen. But I knew video evidence was only half the battle. Brenda has money, and rich people use their wealth to bend the legal system. I knew I needed to take away her financial leverage. Jasmine woke up the screen of her iPad, bringing up a complex spreadsheet filled with highlighted numbers and red flags. I sat in the back of an Uber on the way to this hospital and used my professional database credentials to pull the public tax filings, corporate registry documents, and credit liabilities for Brenda's logistics company. "What did you find?" I asked, leaning in to look at the screen. Major Davis had confirmed her audit was accurate, but I wanted to hear the details directly from the source. Jasmine pointed to a column of massive negative numbers. Brenda's logistics firm is drowning in debt. She has been taking out high-interest loans to cover operating costs for the last 3 years. She owes the Internal Revenue Service over $2 million in back taxes. That $50 million Department of Defense contract was her absolute last lifeline. Without it, she will be forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy within the month. The sheer scale of Brenda's financial desperation made her actions at the reception even more pathetic. She had been willing to sacrifice my daughter's safety to secure the one contract that could save her sinking ship. "But that is not even the worst part," Jasmine continued, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "While I was digging through the company's ledger, I noticed a series of bizarre, undocumented cash transfers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars being funneled out of the corporate operating account into a private offshore holding trust." "That looks like embezzlement," I noted. "Who owns the offshore trust?" Jasmine looked me right in the eyes. "Jason does. Your husband has been systematically bleeding his mother's failing company dry for the past 18 months. I did a quick trace on the routing numbers. The money is not going into savings or investments. It is being wired directly to underground casinos and high-stakes gambling syndicates. Jason has a massive gambling addiction, Abigail. He has hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to very dangerous people." The final piece of the puzzle clicked perfectly into place. That was why Jason was so desperate to protect Brenda tonight. That was why he was willing to lie to the police and frame me for child abuse. If Brenda lost the military contract and the company went under, the financial audit would inevitably expose his embezzlement. He would go to federal prison for corporate fraud. I sat back, absorbing the absolute magnitude of the betrayal. My husband was a criminal, a coward, and a thief. And his mother was a desperate, violent narcissist. Jasmine handed me the iPad, the glowing screen illuminating the dark hallway. "You have the security footage to put them both in jail for the assault and the false police report," she said softly. "And now you have the financial receipts to ensure they lose absolutely everything they own." I took the device, feeling the cold metal against my palms. "Thank you, Jasmine," I said, my voice resolute. "You gave me the ammunition. Now I'm going to pull the trigger." I turned away from the waiting area, holding the silver tablet tightly against my side. Jasmine watched me go, her ruined wedding dress trailing on the floor, knowing exactly what I was about to do. I walked down the bright corridor toward the main nurses' station. The 2 local officers who had taken my initial statement were standing there, handing paperwork to a man in a sharp gray suit. He had a gold badge clipped to his belt. He was a senior investigator. Detective Lawson called in because the case now involved a high-ranking military officer and a prominent local business owner. I approached the desk, my dress shoes clicking against the linoleum. Detective Lawson looked up, his eyes briefly sweeping over my uniform and the silver eagles on my shoulders. "Colonel," he said, nodding respectfully. My officers were just briefing me on the situation. We have your husband in a holding cell downtown, and his mother is currently at the precinct. However, her defense attorney is pushing hard for an immediate release on bail. He is claiming the initial arrest was an overreaction to a family dispute and threatening to sue the department for false imprisonment. I placed the iPad flat on the high counter right between the detective and the two officers. He is going to have a very difficult time proving that I said my voice dangerously calm. Detective, I understand Brenda filed a preemptive police report claiming I was a mentally unstable veteran who attacked my own daughter. I understand she tried to use my military service against me to build a narrative of a hysterical mother extorting a wealthy family. Lawson nodded slowly, his expression serious. That is correct, Colonel. That was the basis of their initial 911 call. It is a very serious allegation, especially given your security clearance and rank. I tapped the screen of the tablet, waking it up. Then I suggest you watch this, I said. This is the raw, unedited 4K security footage from the ballroom obtained by my sister-in-law just an hour ago. I pressed play. The three men leaned in, their eyes fixed on the bright screen. The video quality was impeccable, capturing the lavish reception in sharp detail. The audio kicked in, clear and undeniable. They watched as Lily happily twirled on the dance floor. They saw her small shoe accidentally brush against Brenda's silver gown. And then they saw the monster hiding beneath the expensive clothes. The officers flinched visibly as the footage showed Brenda spinning around, her face contorted with rage. The tablet speakers played her vicious words perfectly. This dress cost more than your mother makes in a year, you clumsy little brat. No child of a soldier ruins my son's day. Get her out. They watched in stunned silence as Brenda grabbed my 10-year-old daughter by the arm, violently lifting her off her feet, and shoved her backward with deliberate, malicious force. The sickening thud of Lily's head hitting the solid marble pillar echoed from the small speakers, followed immediately by her agonizing scream. But I did not stop the video there. I let it keep playing. I made them watch the aftermath. I pointed to the edge of the frame where Jason was clearly visible. Look at my husband, I instructed coldly. The detective and the officers watched as Jason stood perfectly still a mere 10 feet away. They saw him watch his daughter bleed on the floor, only to turn and look at the wealthy investors to gauge their reactions. They watched him grab my arm and aggressively pull me away, trying to hide the injury to protect his mother's corporate networking event. Detective Lawson physically stepped back from the counter, his jaw tight with absolute disgust. The two local officers exchanged a look of pure outrage, realizing just how deeply they had been manipulated when they first walked into the emergency room. They had almost arrested a mother protecting her bleeding child, all because a rich woman lied through her teeth. That is not a family dispute, Lawson said, his voice dropping an octave. That is aggravated assault on a minor, and the husband is an accessory. I slid the financial documents Jasmine had prepared across the screen, bringing up the embezzlement records and the massive tax debts. And this is their motive, I added. Brenda is millions of dollars in debt to the Internal Revenue Service. Her company is entirely dependent on a $50 million Department of Defense logistics contract that I personally oversee. Jason has been embezzling corporate funds to pay off underground gambling debts. They were willing to sacrifice a child frame, a military officer, and lie to the police, all to ensure that federal contract was signed tonight. The table turn was absolute and devastating. The narrative Brenda had so carefully constructed was completely annihilated by undeniable, irrefutable receipts. Detective Lawson did not hesitate for another second. He unclipped the heavy black radio from his duty belt and brought it to his mouth. Dispatch, this is Detective Lawson, badge number 402. I need you to immediately contact the booking desk at the main precinct. Go ahead, Lawson. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. Issue an immediate upgrade on the charges for the suspect, Brenda currently in processing, Lawson commanded, his eyes locked onto mine. Add aggravated assault on a minor, felony child endangerment, and criminal conspiracy to commit fraud. Deny all bail requests. Do not let her lawyer walk her out of that building. Repeat, place a hard hold on the suspect. She is a flight risk with offshore accounts. Copy that, detective, the radio buzzed. Upgrading charges and issuing a no bail hold now. Lawson clipped the radio back onto his belt. He looked at the iPad, then back at me, a profound respect settling over his features. Your mother-in-law picked the wrong woman to mess with Colonel. She picked the wrong mother, I corrected him smoothly. And she is about to find out that the military does not reward terrorists whether they are hiding in caves or wearing designer gowns. I picked up the tablet, feeling the immense weight of the victory settling in my chest. The trap had snapped shut. Brenda and Jason were officially locked in a cage of their own making, and the key was currently sitting securely in my uniform pocket. Now all that was left was to watch the empire they loved so much burn to the ground. I walked out of the hospital, sliding doors alongside Detective Lawson, the cool night air hitting my face. We agreed to head straight to the main precinct. Lawson wanted to personally oversee the processing of the upgraded charges, and I needed to be there to ensure the federal implications of Brenda's false report were properly documented. I followed his unmarked cruiser through the quiet city streets, the silver eagles on my dress blues reflecting in the rearview mirror. When we arrived at the downtown precinct, Lawson led me through a secure side entrance, bypassing the main public lobby. The concrete hallways were brightly lit and smelled of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. Before we even reached the main booking area, the shrill, unmistakable sound of my mother-in-law's voice echoed off the cinderblock walls. Brenda was entirely unhinged. Lawson held up a hand, gesturing for me to step into a small observation room that looked out over the main booking desk through a pane of one-way glass. I stood in the darkened room, watching the woman who had tormented me for years self-destruct in spectacular fashion. Brenda looked like a ruined ghost of the socialite she had pretended to be just hours earlier. Her expensive silver-beaded gown was torn at the hem and stained with spilled champagne. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was now a frantic, tangled mess. But despite her disheveled appearance, her arrogance remained completely untouched. She was standing at the high booking counter, her finger aggressively pointed right in the face of a deeply exhausted desk sergeant. Two junior officers stood nearby, looking like they were barely restraining themselves from physically securing her. I am absolutely not touching that filthy ink pad, Brenda shrieked, snatching her hands away and crossing her arms defensively over her chest. Do you have any idea what kind of bacteria is on that thing? I am not some common street criminal you pulled out of an alleyway. I am the chief executive officer of a premier logistics firm. I am a pillar of this community. Ma'am, the desk sergeant said, his voice flat and monotone, clearly having dealt with entitled individuals his entire career. You are currently under arrest. Fingerprinting is a mandatory part of the booking process. If you continue to refuse to comply with a lawful order, we will add resisting arrest to your growing list of charges. Now put your hands on the pad. Brenda let out a sharp, mocking laugh that made my stomach turn. Add whatever imaginary charges you want, she sneered, leaning over the counter to intimidate the sergeant. None of this is going to stick. This entire arrest is a pathetic misunderstanding, orchestrated by my mentally unstable daughter-in-law. She is a nobody, a low-ranking military desk worker who snapped and hurt her own child. You fools actually listened to her. I watched her lie with such effortless conviction. It was terrifying to see how easily she could twist reality even while standing inside a police station. But she was not done. She decided to pull out her ultimate trump card, the very asset she believed made her completely untouchable. You are going to feel incredibly stupid in about 20 minutes, Brenda announced loudly, making sure every officer in the room could hear her. My company is finalizing a massive federal contract with the United States Air Force. I am a major military contractor. In fact, the base procurement colonel was scheduled to attend my son's wedding reception tonight as my personal guest of honor. When he finds out that local police officers arrested a federal defense contractor on completely fabricated charges, he is going to be furious. She paced back and forth, her high heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. He is on his way here right now to bail me out, she lied smoothly, inflating her own importance with every word. The colonel holds immense power. He is going to walk through those doors, secure my release, and then he is going to make sure every single one of you loses your badge. You will be directing traffic in a school zone by tomorrow morning. I am going to bankrupt this entire police department with a civil rights lawsuit. In the observation room, Detective Lawson shook his head, a grim smile playing on his lips. She really likes digging that hole deeper, does she not? He murmured. I remained perfectly silent, watching her parade her absolute ignorance. She was leveraging my own rank, my own title against the very police department that was currently protecting my daughter. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the public entrance swung open with a loud bang. A tall man, in a sharply tailored expensive gray suit, strode into the booking area. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and wore an expression of aggressive confidence. This was Gregory Pierce, one of the most notoriously ruthless and expensive defense attorneys in the city. Brenda had clearly used her one phone call effectively. Brenda Pierce called out quickly, closing the distance to the booking counter. Do not say another word to these officers. I am taking over from here. Oh, thank God you are here. Gregory. Brenda sighed dramatically, instantly playing the role of the distressed victim. These animals are trying to force me to put my hands in ink. They arrested me based on the hysterical lies of a traumatized veteran. Pierce turned his sharp gaze onto the desk sergeant. My client is a highly respected businesswoman with zero criminal history. I am formally demanding her immediate release on her own recognizance. This arrest is a blatant overreach stemming from a private family dispute. If she is not processed and released in the next 10 minutes, I am filing an emergency motion for false imprisonment and harassment against this precinct. The desk sergeant did not even blink. He picked up a fresh stack of paperwork that had just printed out from the machine behind him. You can file whatever you want, counselor, the sergeant replied evenly. But your client is not going anywhere. Excuse me, Pierce demanded, his voice rising in indignation. On what grounds are you holding a woman of her standing for a simple misdemeanor dispute? Because it is no longer a misdemeanor, Detective Lawson said, stepping out of the observation room and walking directly into the booking area. I followed closely behind him, staying just out of Brenda's immediate line of sight. Lawson walked up to the counter and handed the attorney the freshly printed papers. Based on new, irrefutable video evidence, we have upgraded the charges, Lawson stated clearly. Your client is now being held on felony child endangerment, aggravated assault on a minor, and criminal conspiracy to commit fraud by filing a false police report. The district attorney has already reviewed the footage and signed off. Bail is explicitly denied. Brenda's jaw dropped. The arrogant fire in her eyes was instantly extinguished, replaced by a cold, creeping panic. Video evidence, she stammered, looking frantically at her lawyer. What video evidence? There were no cameras near the dance floor. Pierce scanned the paperwork rapidly, his confident demeanor cracking as he read the severity of the charges. He looked up at Detective Lawson, his professional mask slipping. Is this accurate? He asked quietly. You have video. 4K resolution with perfect audio. Lawson confirmed with a satisfied nod. And I assure you, counselor, once you see it, you will realize this is not a case you want to take to trial. Brenda gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. No, this is impossible, she whispered, her reality finally beginning to fracture. I need to call the colonel. Let me call the base procurement colonel. He will fix this. I stepped completely out of the shadows, moving into the harsh bright lights of the booking area. My dress shoes clicked rhythmically against the floor until I was standing directly beside Detective Lawson. Brenda slowly turned her head, her eyes traveling from my polished shoes, up the dark blue fabric of my uniform, to the shiny silver eagles resting on my shoulders. I do not think you need to use a phone to do that, Brenda, I said, my voice echoing loudly in the silent room. I am right here. Brenda stared at me, her eyes wide and unblinking, as if looking at a ghost. The silence in the booking area was so absolute that I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. She looked at the silver eagles on my shoulders again, her mind desperately trying to reject the reality standing right in front of her. But there was no denying it. The dark blue uniform, the perfectly pinned Judge Advocate General insignia, and the unyielding expression on my face confirmed her absolute worst nightmare. The woman whose child she had assaulted, The woman she had mocked for having a miserable grunt salary was the exact same officer holding the final signature to her $50 million lifeline. Her high-priced defense attorney, Gregory Pierce, looked back and forth between us. He was a smart man, and it only took him about 3 seconds to put the pieces together. He took a massive step away from Brenda, closing his leather briefcase with a sharp snap. "You did not mention that your daughter-in-law was the base procurement colonel," Pierce said, his tone shifting from aggressive confidence to deep professional irritation. "You told me she was an unstable enlisted clerk. I cannot help you with federal military contract fraud, Brenda. You lied to your own counsel." Before Brenda could formulate a response, the heavy metal door leading to the holding cells clanged open with a loud metallic screech. A deputy walked through, firmly guiding Jason by the arm. They were bringing him up to the front desk to consult with his newly arrived lawyer. Jason looked entirely disheveled. His expensive tuxedo shirt was wrinkled, his bow tie hung loosely around his neck, and he had dark circles under his panicked eyes. But the exact moment he saw me standing in the precinct hallway just outside the main booking area, his entire posture changed. The fear vanished, replaced by a desperate, ugly kind of anger that only a true narcissist possesses when they feel cornered. Jason forcefully pulled his arm away from the deputy and stormed toward me. The deputy took a step forward to intervene, but Detective Lawson held up a hand silently, allowing Jason enough rope to hang himself. Jason cornered me against the cold concrete wall of the hallway, leaning in close so the officers could not hear his every word. He actually thought he still had the upper hand. He thought I was still the quiet, accommodating wife he had emotionally manipulated for an entire decade. "Abigail, you have completely lost your mind," Jason hissed, his face turning a blotchy red with fury. "Tell these cops to drop this right now. You are embarrassing yourself and destroying our family. Do you have any idea what you are doing? If you do not walk back to that desk and withdraw every single charge against me and my mother, I swear to you, I will ruin your entire life." I stood perfectly still, letting him speak. I wanted him to empty his entire magazine of threats. I wanted to hear exactly what kind of monster I had married. "I will call the bank right now and freeze every joint account we have," Jason threatened, his voice trembling with misplaced rage. "You will not have a single dime to pay for Lily's hospital bills. You will not be able to buy groceries. And when we go to family court, my mother will hire the most ruthless lawyers in the state. We will take full custody of Lily. You work long military hours, Abigail. You deploy overseas. No judge is going to give a child to an unstable veteran when the father has the backing of a multi-million-dollar corporate estate. You will never see her again. Drop the charges immediately, or I will take my daughter and leave you with absolutely nothing." He stood there panting slightly, waiting for me to break. He expected tears. He expected me to cave under the immense financial pressure and the terrifying threat of losing my only child. Instead, I calmly unzipped the black leather military tote bag hanging from my shoulder. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I held it out toward him. Jason looked at the envelope, a smug, victorious smile creeping onto his face. He reached out and snatched it from my hand. "See?" he whispered triumphantly. "I knew you would come to your senses. You are finally doing the right thing for once. Have you already signed the withdrawal forms?" "Open it, Jason," I said. My voice was completely devoid of emotion, as cold and hard as the marble pillar his mother had pushed our daughter into. Jason ripped open the flap of the envelope and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. He flipped to the very first page. His smug smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. He blinked rapidly, reading the bold black header at the top of the official document. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." "This is a divorce petition," Jason stammered, looking up at me as if I had just spoken to him in a foreign language. "What is this?" "Keep reading," I instructed. "Turn to page 4. Read the section regarding the division of assets." Jason frantically flipped through the pages, his hands beginning to shake uncontrollably. His eyes scanned the paragraphs, widening in absolute horror as he read the financial disclosures I had carefully compiled with Jasmine's forensic audit. "You see, Jason?" I said, keeping my voice low and incredibly steady. You cannot freeze our joint bank accounts because I already emptied my portion of the funds yesterday morning and moved them into a secure individual account at a military credit union. And you certainly cannot threaten me with your mother's multi-million-dollar estate because that estate is currently millions of dollars in debt to the Internal Revenue Service. But the best part is the third paragraph down, the one detailing your offshore holding trust. Jason choked on his own breath. He looked exactly like a man who had just stepped on a landmine. His eyes darted frantically around the hallway to see if Detective Lawson was listening. I have known about your crippling gambling addiction for months. I continued stepping closer to him until he was forced to back up against the precinct wall. I have known about the underground casinos, and thanks to an incredible forensic audit completed tonight, I now have the exact routing numbers proving that you have been embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from your mother's logistics company to pay off your debts. Jason looked like he was going to be physically sick. The divorce papers in his hands trembled violently. "Abigail, please," he whispered, his previous bravado completely annihilated by the crushing weight of the truth. "There is no multi-million-dollar estate, Jason," I said, driving the final nail into his coffin. "Your mother is bankrupt and going to jail. You are an embezzler facing federal fraud charges. The house we live in was purchased entirely through my Veterans Affairs loan in my name only. The only thing you are taking custody of is a federal prison cell. You have absolutely nothing left to threaten me with." I reached out and patted the lapel of his wrinkled tuxedo jacket. "Sign the papers, Jason," I said softly, "or I hand the embezzlement file directly to the detective standing 10 feet away. The choice is yours." Jason stared at the divorce petition resting heavily in his trembling hands. He looked at the black pen I had pulled from my uniform pocket and held out to him. The precinct hallway felt like a vacuum sucking the air right out of his lungs. His hands shook so violently he could barely keep a grip on the thick manila envelope. He looked past my shoulder at Detective Lawson, who stood entirely unbothered a few feet away, watching the exchange with professional detachment. Jason finally realized there was no escape. The embezzlement, the gambling, the false police report. It was all out in the open. He pressed the pen to the paper and scribbled his messy signature on the acknowledgement of service line. I snatched the papers back and slid them smoothly into my tote bag. "You have 24 hours to pack your things and get out of my house," I told him. Before Jason could utter another pathetic excuse, a blinding beam of headlights swept across the frosted glass windows of the precinct lobby. The powerful glare cut through the dim municipal lighting, followed by the heavy, distinct rumble of a massive engine coming to a halt directly in the designated law enforcement parking zone outside. Back in the main booking area, Brenda had been leaning against the high counter, her face pale and her breathing shallow after her lawyer had essentially abandoned her defense. But the exact moment those headlights flashed across the room, her head snapped up. A sudden surge of adrenaline seemed to hit her system. She pushed herself off the counter and practically sprinted toward the reinforced glass windows facing the dark street. She pressed her hands against the glass, peering out into the night. A massive black government-issued SUV with official United States military plates was idling at the curb. The heavily tinted windows obscured the passengers inside, but the vehicle itself was an undeniable, terrifying symbol of federal authority. A manic, desperate energy suddenly seized my mother-in-law. Her narcissistic mind, completely unable to process the humiliating reality that I was the senior officer holding her fate, violently rejected the truth. She latched onto the sight of that government vehicle like a drowning woman grabbing a life raft. She spun around to face the desk sergeant, Detective Lawson, and her terrified son standing in the hallway. "See?" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the concrete walls and making the junior officers wince. "I told you, there is the colonel. The real base procurement colonel is here." She pointed a trembling finger directly at me, a wild, triumphant grin spreading across her flushed face. "You thought you could trick me, Abigail. You put on a uniform and pinned some fake medals to your chest to scare me into dropping the charges. But you are just a low-level desk clerk. You do not have the power to cancel my contract. The real colonel, the man I have been dealing with over email for months, just pulled up. He is here to bail me out and sign the paperwork." Her lawyer, Gregory Pierce, who was in the middle of packing his leather briefcase to leave, paused and looked out the window with a skeptical frown. Even Jason perked up, a sickening glimmer of hope returning to his tear-stained face. "Mother, is it really him?" Jason asked weakly from the hallway, desperate for anyone to save him from federal prison. "Of course it is him," Brenda gloated to the entire room, her arrogance flaring back to life with terrifying speed. She turned her attention back to the local police officers behind the desk. "You are all going to lose your jobs. I warned you. When he walks through those doors, I am going to demand that every single officer involved in this ridiculous arrest be terminated immediately. And as for you, Abigail," she spat, glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, "you are going to be court-martialed for impersonating a senior officer and interfering with a multi-million-dollar federal defense contract." I did not say a single word. I simply stood next to Detective Lawson, my hands clasped loosely behind my back, in a standard military parade rest stance. I watched her revel in her final pathetic delusion. I wanted her to build herself up as high as possible so the fall would break her completely. Outside, the heavy doors of the black SUV opened. 3 figures stepped out into the night. The heavy precinct doors swung open with a resounding thud that shook the glass. The noise in the lobby died instantly. Footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor. They were sharp, synchronized, heavy military boots striking the ground with absolute terrifying purpose. A tall, broad-shouldered man in an immaculate Air Force service dress uniform strode into the room. He was flanked by 2 heavily armed military police personnel wearing tactical gear and sidearms. The man carried a thick leather portfolio stamped with the gold seal of the Department of Defense. It was Major Davis, my trusted second-in-command. Brenda practically threw herself toward the center of the lobby to intercept him. She frantically smoothed down her ruined silver gown and plastered on the most sickeningly sweet, sycophantic smile I had ever seen. "Oh, Colonel, thank God you are finally here!" Brenda gasped, stepping directly into Major Davis's path and blocking his way. "I am Brenda, the Chief Executive Officer of the logistics firm. We have that $50 million contract to finalize. You have to help me. This local police department has gone completely rogue. They arrested me based on the hysterical lies of this woman over here." She pointed her finger right at my face. "She is a deranged veteran who works in some basement office at your base. She is trying to ruin my life and sabotage our business deal. Please tell these local cops to release me immediately so we can get back to the hotel and sign the paperwork." Major Davis stopped walking. The 2 military police officers behind him halted instantly, their expressions carved from solid stone. Davis looked down at Brenda. He did not smile. He did not extend his hand to shake hers. He looked at her with the kind of cold, clinical detachment one might reserve for a cockroach scurrying across a dining table. "Ma'am, step aside," Major Davis commanded, his voice booming with uncompromising military authority. Brenda blinked rapidly, her fake smile faltering for a second. "But I am your VIP guest. The military contract, my son's wedding." Major Davis did not wait for her to finish her rambling sentence. He effortlessly stepped around her frozen form, completely ignoring her existence, and marched straight toward the hallway where I was standing. Brenda spun around, watching in absolute horror as the man she thought was her savior walked directly toward the woman she despised. Major Davis stopped precisely 3 paces in front of me. He snapped his heels together with a sharp crack that echoed through the entire silent precinct. He raised his right hand in a crisp, flawless salute. "Colonel Major Davis," said, his voice ringing out loud and clear for every single person in the room to hear, "I have the finalized procurement blacklist documents you requested. The security risk flag has been fully processed and approved by the Pentagon. We just need your final authorizing signature to permanently terminate the contractor's federal bidding privileges." I slowly returned his salute, lowering my hand with deliberate precision. "Thank you, Major Davis," I replied, my voice steady and commanding. "Right on time." I looked past his shoulder straight at Brenda. Her entire world had just stopped spinning. The delusion was shattered into microscopic fragments. Her mouth hung open, but no sound came out. She finally understood that the massive, untouchable federal authority she had been trying to hide behind all night was the very same authority standing directly in front of her, ready to end her empire with a single stroke of a pen. I stepped fully away from the hallway wall, moving past Major Davis and the two heavily armed military police officers. Every single eye in the precinct lobby was locked onto me. I was no longer the exhausted, terrified mother sitting in a blood-stained formal dress in a hospital waiting room. I was wearing my pristine United States Air Force dress blues. The dark fabric was immaculate, perfectly tailored, and free of a single wrinkle. As I walked forward, my polished black shoes clicking rhythmically against the linoleum floor, the harsh fluorescent lights of the booking area caught the brilliant gleam of the silver eagles pinned securely to my shoulders. They were the undeniable heavy marks of a full-bird colonel. Resting proudly just below them on my lapels was the distinct crossed sword and pen insignia of the Judge Advocate General Corps. Brenda looked as though all the blood had been violently drained from her body. Her jaw literally dropped, her mouth hanging open in a silent, grotesque mask of absolute terror. She stared at the silver eagles, her eyes darting frantically between the rank insignia, the colorful rows of commendation ribbons on my chest and my face. Her mind was desperately trying to find a loophole in reality. She simply could not process that the woman she had abused and belittled for a decade, the woman whose 10-year-old daughter she had just shoved into a solid marble pillar, was the exact same federal authority she had been worshipping all evening. Next to her, Gregory Pierce, the high-paid shark of a defense attorney, physically recoiled. He took two large, involuntary steps backward, his expensive leather shoes squeaking sharply against the floor. He had spent his entire career reading people and analyzing power dynamics, and he instantly recognized the catastrophic magnitude of this situation. He was not just defending a wealthy socialite against a petty domestic dispute. He was standing directly in the blast radius of a senior military legal officer who possessed the unilateral federal authority to completely dismantle his client's financial existence. I stopped precisely 2 feet in front of Brenda. The silence in the room was deafening. I looked down at her ruined, champagne-stained silver gown, then slowly looked up into her terrified, trembling eyes. "I heard you were waiting for the colonel to approve your $50 million logistics contract," I said, my voice echoing through the quiet lobby with icy, uncompromising authority. "Let us talk about it." Brenda let out a pathetic, suffocated gasp. She reached out and gripped the edge of the booking counter to keep her knees from completely buckling beneath her. "Abigail," she whispered, her voice cracking under the immense, crushing weight of her own hubris. "Abigail, please. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. You know I love Lily. I would never intentionally hurt my own granddaughter. I was just startled. We are family. You cannot do this to me. You cannot take the contract away. It is everything I have built. It is my entire life." I did not blink. I did not soften my posture for a single second. "Family does not drag a 10-year-old child off a dance floor by her hair," I replied coldly, stepping 1 inch closer to ensure she heard every single syllable. "Family does not push a little girl into a stone pillar because she accidentally stepped on a dress. And family certainly does not run to a police station to file a fraudulent report claiming a mother violently attacked her own bleeding child to extort money. You made your choice on that dance floor tonight, Brenda. You chose your vanity over my daughter's life. Now you get to live with the absolute destruction of that choice." I turned my head slightly without breaking eye contact with my mother-in-law. "Major Davis," I said. Major Davis immediately stepped forward, unzipping the thick leather portfolio he had brought with him from the military base. He pulled out a crisp, heavy stack of official Department of Defense procurement documents. He handed me a sleek black pen. I took the documents and placed them flat on the booking counter right next to the fingerprint ink pad Brenda had been screaming about just minutes earlier. "This is the final security risk assessment for your logistics firm," I explained to Brenda, my pen hovering over the signature line on the final page. "It details your pending felony charges for child endangerment, aggravated assault, and criminal conspiracy." It also includes the comprehensive forensic financial audit my sister-in-law Jasmine conducted this evening, which exposes your massive $2 million tax debt to the Internal Revenue Service and your son's rampant corporate embezzlement. Brenda let out a choked sob, shaking her head back and forth in denial. I pressed the pen firmly to the paper. With this signature, your company is officially designated as a severe security and moral liability. You are permanently blacklisted from securing any federal contract with the United States military. I signed my name with sharp, deliberate strokes. The ink bled into the paper, permanently erasing Brenda's future. I capped the pen and handed the entire stack of documents back to Major Davis. Execute the order, Major, I commanded. Ensure every procurement office in the region receives the blacklist notification immediately. Yes, Colonel Major Davis responded, securing the documents back into the portfolio and stepping back into a rigid protective stance. Gregory Pierce cleared his throat. The arrogant defense attorney looked at the leather briefcase in his hand, then looked at Brenda's trembling, defeated posture. He knew the logistics company was officially dead. He knew the millions of dollars Brenda had promised him to make this criminal case disappear simply did not exist. He was a businessman above all else, and Brenda was now a massive liability. Brenda Pierce said, his tone entirely devoid of the aggressive confidence he had displayed when he first walked into the precinct. In light of this new evidence, the video footage, and the severe federal financial complications involved, I am formally withdrawing as your legal counsel effective immediately. You will receive an invoice for my travel time tonight. Good luck. Pierce turned around and briskly walked out the heavy glass doors of the precinct, abandoning her without a single backward glance. No, Gregory, wait. Brenda pleaded weakly, reaching a shaking hand toward the closing doors. You cannot leave me here. You cannot leave me with these people. But he was gone. Brenda was completely alone, stripped of her fake wealth, stripped of her high-priced lawyer, and stripped of the false high society armor she had worn for decades. She slumped against the booking counter, burying her face in her hands, as loud, ugly sobs began to echo through the lobby. From the hallway, Jason watched the entire scene unfold. He watched his mother's empire evaporate into thin air. He slid down the concrete wall until he was sitting on the floor, clutching his signed divorce petition against his chest. He was crying too, finally mourning the loss of his trust fund, and facing the terrifying reality of a federal prison sentence. I looked at the desk sergeant. He was staring at me with an expression of profound respect and sheer awe. Sergeant, I said, my voice returning to a calm professional volume. I believe you were about to process the prisoner. I will leave you to do your job. The sergeant nodded enthusiastically, grabbing a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Yes, Colonel. We will handle it from here. I turned around and walked out of the precinct, accompanied by Major Davis and the military police detail. The cool night air hit my face as the heavy doors closed behind me, cutting off the sound of Brenda's pathetic sobbing. The financial guillotine had fallen. It was time to go back to the hospital, back to my daughter, and tell her that she was finally safe. I stopped in the precinct parking lot. Major Davis turned to me. Colonel, he said, his voice entirely professional. Standard Department of Defense protocol requires the physical copies of the Morality and Security Clause failure notifications to be served directly to the corporate officer on record. I took a deep breath and held out my hand. Give me the folder, Major, I said. I will serve her myself. I turned around and walked right back through the heavy glass doors of the police station. The scene inside had barely changed. Brenda was still slumped against the high booking counter, her shoulders shaking with pathetic sobs. Two junior officers were attempting to firmly place her hands behind her back to apply the handcuffs. Jason was still sitting on the floor, clutching his signed divorce papers. He watched his mother, the woman he had sacrificed his own daughter to protect, being reduced to an absolute nobody. Hold on a moment, officers, I called out. The two cops paused, stepping back respectfully as I approached the desk. Brenda slowly lifted her head. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in thick black lines, ruining her high society appearance. She looked at me with a mixture of raw hatred and desperate pleading. I placed the thick official Department of Defense folder down onto the hard surface of the precinct desk. The thump of the paper hitting the counter echoed loudly. The front of the folder bore the bright red stamp of a federal security denial. I need you to understand exactly what this is. Brenda, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any sympathy. You paraded around a $500,000 wedding reception, treating the catering staff like garbage, acting as though your wealth made you completely untouchable. You thought your money and your corporate title meant the rules did not apply to you. Brenda stared at the red stamp on the folder. What is that? She whispered, her voice trembling violently. You already canceled the contract. You already ruined me. What more do you want? I do not want anything from you, I replied coldly. This is your official notification of failure. When you apply for a $50 million government contract, you are subjected to an incredibly rigorous background check. The United States military does not just hand out taxpayer money to anyone with a fleet of delivery trucks. You are required to pass strict morality and security clearance clauses. We demand absolute integrity. When a commander in the field relies on a logistics firm to deliver critical supplies, they need to know the people running that firm are honorable. You have proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that you possess no honor. Brenda let out a ragged scoff. Morality, she choked out. This is a business deal. It has nothing to do with my personal life. I leaned over the counter, my face just inches from hers. It has everything to do with your personal life, I corrected her sharply. The Department of Defense explicitly requires its contractors to maintain the highest standards of ethical and lawful behavior. You are currently standing in a police station facing multiple pending felony charges for aggravated assault on a minor and child endangerment. You pushed a child into a stone pillar so hard she suffered a grade 2 concussion. That act alone is a direct violation of the morality clause. Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She looked at the officers standing beside her, realizing that every single person in the room knew exactly what she had done. But you did not stop there. I continued, my voice growing harder with every sentence. You decided to double down. You filed a false police report. You attempted to frame an active duty military officer for your own violent crime. You engaged in a criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice that completely destroys your security clearance. The military entrusts its contractors with sensitive supply routes and classified material transport. We cannot and will not trust a woman who lies to law enforcement to protect her own vanity. I opened the folder and pointed to the second page. Therefore, based on your actions tonight, your logistics firm has been permanently flagged in the Federal Procurement Database. You are not just losing this single $50 million contract. You are officially blacklisted from every single military bid, federal grant, and government subsidy program in the United States. Your company will never receive another dime of federal funding. The absolute finality of my words crashed down on Brenda like a physical weight. The last remaining shreds of her pride were systematically dismantled right in front of her son, the police officers, and my military detail. She had built her entire identity around being a powerful, untouchable chief executive officer. Without that title, she was nothing more than an abusive, aging woman wearing a ruined silver dress in a county jail. You planned this! Brenda hissed, her face contorting with a sudden venomous rage. You knew exactly who I was when you married my son. You waited for this moment to destroy my family. I shook my head slowly, feeling absolutely nothing but pity for her profound delusion. I did not plan anything, Brenda. I spent 10 years trying to be a good daughter-in-law to you. I spent 10 years enduring your passive-aggressive insults, your constant belittling of my career, and your relentless attempts to control my husband. I never wanted to destroy your family, but the moment you laid your hands on my child, the moment you chose to make her bleed to protect your ego, you destroyed yourself. I closed the folder and slid it across the counter until it touched her trembling hands. Consider yourself formally served, I stated. I stepped back, nodding to the desk sergeant. Process the prisoner, I told him. The junior officers stepped forward again. This time Brenda did not fight them. She did not scream or threaten to sue the department. She simply hung her head, completely defeated, as the cold metal handcuffs clicked securely around her wrists. I turned my back on her for the final time. I walked out of the precinct, leaving the ruins of her fake empire behind me, and finally headed back to the hospital to see my beautiful daughter. I had barely pushed open the heavy glass doors to the parking lot when a piercing shriek echoed from the booking area behind me. I stopped, my hand resting on the cold metal handle. The sound was not the defeated crying from a moment ago. It was a sudden, violent resurgence of pure narcissistic rage. I turned around and looked back into the brightly lit precinct lobby. Brenda was straining against the grip of the two junior officers, her face a terrifying mask of blotchy fury. The handcuffs clinked sharply as she fought to point a trembling finger in my direction. "You think this destroys me?" Brenda screamed, her voice cracking under the sheer volume. "You think taking away one government contract is going to bankrupt my family? You are a fool, Abigail. You are a vindictive little fool. My company does not need your federal handouts to survive. We have an entire portfolio of private sector wealth. We have corporate investors who respect me. And even if they back out, we have Jason's trust fund. My son is a millionaire on his own. We are untouchable. We will rebuild everything, and I will spend every dime of that private wealth ensuring you never see your daughter again." Jason, still sitting on the floor clutching the divorce papers, suddenly went incredibly pale. He scrambled to his feet, holding a hand out toward his mother. "Mother, stop!" Jason pleaded, his voice cracking with absolute panic. "Just stop talking. Please, do not say anything else." But Brenda was immune to his begging. She was riding a desperate wave of delusion, convinced that her private wealth would serve as an impenetrable shield against the criminal charges. She threw her head back and laughed, a harsh sound that made Detective Lawson cringe. "We are going to crush you in family court," Brenda taunted, her eyes wild. "You will be paying us alimony." Before I could take a step back into the lobby to shut her down, the precinct doors behind me slid open. I turned my head. Jasmine walked in from the cool night air. She was still wearing the blood-stained remnants of her stunning silk wedding gown, but she carried herself with the lethal grace of an executioner. Tucked securely under her arm was a thick black leather binder. She had told me at the hospital that Eric was packing his things, and it seemed she had decided to personally deliver the final piece of her forensic puzzle. "I would not count on that trust fund," Brenda Jasmine said. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a cutting clarity that instantly silenced the entire room. Brenda stopped laughing. She glared at Jasmine with profound disgust. "What are you doing here?" Brenda hissed. "I told you before, you are not part of this family. Get out of my sight." Jasmine did not flinch. She walked right past me, her ruined dress brushing against the floor, and marched straight up to the booking counter. She dropped the heavy black binder directly on top of the red-stamped federal rejection folder I had just left there. The loud thud made Jason flinch violently. "I am not here as your family," Jasmine replied smoothly, her dark eyes locking onto Brenda. "I am here as a certified forensic accountant. And since my husband Eric just officially cut all ties with your toxic bloodline, I considered it my professional duty to finalize the audit on your private sector wealth. I brought the receipts, Brenda. All of them." Jason lunged forward, his hands reaching desperately for the black binder. "Jasmine, do not do this," he begged, his voice dropping to a pathetic whimper. "I will pay it back. I swear to God, I will pay it all back. Just let me explain." Detective Lawson easily intercepted Jason, grabbing him by the shoulder and shoving him firmly back against the concrete wall. "Stay exactly where you are," the detective commanded. Brenda looked back and forth between her panicked son and the stoic bride. "Pay what back?" she asked, the first sliver of genuine confusion breaking through her rage. "What is in that binder?" Jasmine opened the heavy cover and flipped to the first tabbed section. "This is the complete ledger of your private corporate operating accounts for the last 18 months. I pulled the data using my professional access right after I found the massive tax debt you owe the IRS. You see, Brenda, I noticed a massive discrepancy. Your logistics company was bleeding cash at an alarming rate, but the money was not going toward operating expenses. It was being systematically siphoned out through a series of undocumented wire transfers." Jasmine traced her finger down a long column of numbers highlighted in bright yellow ink. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, Jasmine continued reading the numbers aloud. 50,000 here, 75,000 there, all funneled out of your primary corporate accounts and transferred into a blind offshore trust. Brenda frowned, looking at Jason. I did not authorize any offshore transfers. The only person with dual signing authority on the primary accounts is Jason. Exactly, Jasmine said, slamming the binder shut with a resounding crack. Jason has been embezzling from you for almost 2 years, Brenda. Your golden boy, the son you were willing to sacrifice your own granddaughter for, is the exact reason your company is completely bankrupt. He has been systematically stealing the private wealth you just bragged about. Jason covered his face with his hands, sliding back down the wall until he hit the floor. He let out a loud, wretched sob. I am sorry, Jason cried into his hands. I had a system. I thought I could win it back before the audit. Win it back. Brenda repeated the words, sounding hollow. She stared at her son, her entire universe rapidly collapsing. What did you do with my money, Jason? Money. He has a crippling gambling addiction. Jasmine answered for him, her tone completely devoid of mercy. He was not investing your money. He was wiring it to underground casinos and high-stakes offshore syndicates. He is hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to very dangerous people. The trust fund is entirely gone. The private investment portfolios are completely drained. The only thing you have left is the millions of dollars you owe the federal government. The silence that followed was absolute. The dynamic between mother and son completely shattered. Brenda stared at Jason, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization. The very person she had lied to the police for was the architect of her complete financial destruction. She had ruined her relationship with her granddaughter and picked a fight with a military officer, all to secure a government contract that would only end up paying off Jason's illegal gambling debts. You stole from me, Brenda whispered, her voice barely audible. Her knees finally buckled. The officers had to hold her up to keep her from collapsing onto the floor. You stole everything. Jasmine turned around and walked back toward me. She did not look at Brenda or Jason again. They were no longer a threat. They were just two criminals crying on the floor of a police station, entirely destroyed by their own greed. Let us go back to the hospital, Jasmine said, linking her arm through mine. We have a family waiting for us. I walked back out into the night, the cool breeze offering a sharp contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the precinct. Jasmine fell into step beside me. The silence between us was comfortable, forged in the fires of a battle we had just definitively won. I pulled my car keys from my pocket, the metal feeling cool against my skin. We reached my vehicle and I unlocked the doors. Before Jasmine could get into the passenger side, the heavy doors of the precinct burst open one last time. It was not Brenda this time. It was Jason. He looked absolutely frantic, his hair disheveled and his eyes wide with a desperate animalistic terror. He practically scrambled across the pavement toward us. Abigail, wait! Jason shouted, his voice cracking. He stopped a few feet away, holding his hands up in a placating gesture, as if trying to calm a wild animal. Please, Abigail, just listen to me for 1 second. I paused, my hand resting on the car door handle. I did not turn to fully face him. You have exactly 1 second, Jason, I replied, my voice hard and unforgiving. Make it count. He took a hesitant step closer. Look, I know I messed up. I know the embezzlement looks bad, but we can fix this. You do not have to go through with the divorce. We can go to counseling. I will go to rehab for the gambling. Just please, you cannot leave us like this. If you walk away now, the bank will find out about the audit. They will call in the loan. We will lose everything. The house, the cars, the company, everything. I finally turned to look at him, a cold smile forming on my lips. You really think I do not know about the loan, Jason? I asked, my tone dripping with disdain. You think I am completely ignorant of how your mother has been keeping that sinking ship afloat? Jason blinked, confusion mingling with the panic on his face. What do you mean? He stammered. I mean that I know exactly why your mother was able to secure a $3 million line of credit from a major financial institution, despite owing the IRS $2 million in back taxes, I explained, enunciating every word clearly. Banks do not just hand out that kind of money to failing companies with massive tax liens. They need collateral. They need a guarantee. I watched the realization slowly begin to dawn on his pathetic face. 6 months ago, your mother asked me to sign a stack of documents she claimed were standard background checks, required for her to bid on military contracts. I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. She lied. She buried a guarantor agreement in that stack of paperwork. She used my top-secret military security clearance, my impeccable federal service record, and my colonel's salary as the primary collateral to secure that loan. The bank saw an active-duty senior officer with a flawless credit history and approved the line of credit based entirely on my reputation. Jason stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish out of water. He had no idea. He had been so busy embezzling the money that he never bothered to ask how his mother had secured it in the first place. But here is the beautiful part, I said, leaning casually against my car. When a guarantor initiates divorce proceedings, especially when those proceedings involve allegations of criminal fraud and embezzlement by the primary borrower, the guarantor has the legal right to immediately withdraw their backing. I filed that paperwork with the bank yesterday morning, Jason. The exact moment you chose to lie to the police and side with your mother over your bleeding daughter, I made a phone call. I took a step toward him, forcing him to back away. The bank's fraud department is already reviewing Jasmine's audit. They know about the underground casinos. They know the money is gone. By 8 o'clock Monday morning, that financial institution is going to officially call in the entire $3 million loan. Your mother has 30 days to pay it back in full, or they will begin seizing every single asset tied to her name. The house she lives in, the cars she drives, the warehouse her logistics company operates out of. Everything will be gone. You did this on purpose, Jason, whispered, his voice shaking with a terrifying mix of awe and horror. You planned this all along. I shook my head, my expression hardening. I did not plan for my mother-in-law to assault my child, Jason. I did not plan for my husband to betray me and try to frame me for a felony. I simply protected myself. I built a fortress, and you two decided to ram your heads repeatedly against the walls. Do not blame me for your own concussions. I turned my back on him and opened the car door. Jason fell to his knees on the hard asphalt. Abigail, please, he sobbed, the sound pathetic and hollow in the empty parking lot. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? You can go to hell, Jason, I said, getting into the driver's seat. Or you can go to federal prison. Honestly, I do not care which one you choose as long as you stay far away from me and my daughter. I slammed the door shut, cutting off the sound of his pathetic crying. Jasmine got into the passenger seat, her face illuminated by the dashboard lights. She looked at me, a tight, satisfied smile on her lips. That was magnificent, she said softly. I started the engine, the powerful hum vibrating through the steering wheel. It was necessary, I corrected her. Now let us go see Lily. I pulled out of the precinct parking lot, leaving Jason kneeling in the darkness, a broken man surrounded by the shattered pieces of his mother's fake empire. The drive back to the hospital was quiet. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation was beginning to fade, replaced by a deep bone-weary exhaustion. But beneath the fatigue there was a profound sense of peace. The war was over. I had won. The toxic weight that had dragged me down for a decade had been entirely severed. We walked back into the pediatric trauma wing. The hospital was quiet, the late-night shift nurses moving silently through the halls. We reached Lily's room and pushed the door open gently. She was still asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. Eric was sitting in the chair next to her bed, reading a book by the dim light of a small lamp. He looked up as we entered, closing the book and setting it aside. How did it go? He asked, his voice low. Jasmine walked over and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. It is done, she said simply. They have nothing left. Eric let out a long sigh, running a hand over his face. He looked exhausted, but the tension that had always tightened his jaw whenever his mother or brother was mentioned was completely gone. "Good," he said. "They deserved it." I walked over to the other side of Lily's bed and gently brushed a strand of dark hair away from her bandaged forehead. She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. "Mommy," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "I am right here, sweetheart," I whispered, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "I am right here." "Are we safe now?" she asked, her small hand reaching out to grab mine. I squeezed her hand tightly, feeling the warmth of her small fingers against my palm. "Yes, baby," I promised her, my voice thick with emotion. "We are completely safe. Nobody is ever going to hurt you again." Lily smiled, her eyes drifting shut again. "Good," she whispered, slipping back into sleep. I stood there for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall. The silver eagles on my uniform felt heavy, but for the first time in a very long time I felt incredibly light. The power of my rank had destroyed my enemies, but the love for my child had saved my life. The morning sun crept through the blinds of the hospital room, casting long shadows across the floor. Lily was sleeping soundly, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor a comforting reminder that the worst was over. Jasmine and Eric had stayed the entire night sleeping in uncomfortable plastic chairs just to make sure we were not alone. I quietly stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my military uniform. The battle from the previous night had been won, but the legal war still required my immediate attention. I needed to ensure that Jason could never step foot near my daughter again. I thanked Jasmine and Eric, promising to return soon, and walked out into the early morning light. I drove directly to the Central Police headquarters downtown. Detective Lawson had called me at dawn, informing me that Jason was being transferred to the county jail for his arraignment on the embezzlement and false reporting charges. However, before he was moved, the department needed my physical signature to finalize the emergency protective orders. I walked into the bustling precinct, my polished shoes clicking against the tile. The atmosphere was completely different from the chaotic night shift. Detectives were drinking coffee, phones were ringing, and the sharp reality of the justice system was in full motion. Detective Lawson met me near the front desk. He was standing next to a distinguished older man with silver hair and a crisp uniform. Colonel Lawson said, extending his hand, "This is Chief Miller. He wanted to personally oversee the finalization of the restraining order, given the severity of the false statements made against a federal officer." Chief Miller shook my hand firmly, expressing his absolute disgust at how Brenda and Jason had attempted to weaponize his police force. We walked toward a secure processing room, where the paperwork was waiting. Just as we approached the heavy wooden door, it opened from the inside. A uniformed deputy was leading Jason out of a holding cell area. He was in handcuffs, his expensive tuxedo now completely ruined, stained with sweat and the grime of a jail cell floor. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot from a night of crying and panic. The reality of his situation had clearly set in. The bank was calling in the massive loan. The forensic audit proved his embezzlement. His mother was facing felony child abuse charges. He had absolutely no money, no leverage, and no future. When Jason looked up and saw me standing there alongside the chief of police, the last remaining shred of his dignity completely vanished. He did not yell. He did not threaten me like he had the night before. Instead, his knees buckled. Right there in the middle of the busy police headquarters, Jason dropped heavily to his knees. The sudden movement made the deputy tense up, but Jason just let his head fall forward, sobbing uncontrollably. "Abigail, please!" Jason wailed, his voice echoing tragically down the long hallway. "Please have mercy on me. I cannot go to federal prison. I have nothing left. The lawyer called me this morning and dropped me as a client because Mother's accounts are frozen. I am completely broke. You cannot let them do this to me. I am Lily's father." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the pathetic man crying on the floor. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no sorrow. All I saw was the man who had grabbed my arm and told me to hide our bleeding daughter in a hotel bathroom to protect a corporate networking event. All I saw was the coward who had lied to the police to save his own skin. "Get up, Jason." I commanded, my voice devoid of any warmth. You are embarrassing yourself. He refused to move, shaking his head and continuing to sob. I will do whatever you want, he begged, his tears hitting the linoleum floor. I will sign whatever you need. Just drop the fraud charges. Please, let me come home. We can figure this out. I need to go home. Chief Miller stepped forward, holding a thick clipboard with a stack of legal documents attached. He looked at Jason with profound contempt before turning to me. Colonel the Chief said, his voice carrying the heavy weight of the law. This is the emergency temporary restraining order. It bars this man from coming within 500 feet of you, your daughter, your place of employment, and your primary residence. I reached out and took the pen the chief offered me. I did not hesitate. I did not tremble. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with sharp, deliberate strokes, sealing Jason's fate right in front of his tear-filled eyes. I handed the clipboard back to the chief. It is done, I said. Jason stared at the signed document, his eyes widening in fresh panic. You cannot ban me from the house, he cried out, struggling against the deputy's grip as he was forced to stand back up. That is my house too. My name is on the marriage certificate. I have a legal right to live there. Where am I supposed to go? I have no money for a hotel. You cannot legally throw me out onto the street. I took a slow step toward him, closing the distance until I was looking directly into his panicked, bloodshot eyes. You really should have paid more attention to our finances, Jason, I said coldly. You assume the house belongs to both of us because we are married, but you seem to have forgotten exactly how we bought that property 5 years ago. Your mother refused to help us with the down payment because she thought the neighborhood was beneath her. Jason swallowed hard, his breathing becoming shallow. We bought that house using my Veterans Affairs home loan, I explained, enunciating every word, so the reality would carve itself deeply into his mind. Because it is a federal VA loan, tied directly to my military service, and because your credit was already secretly destroyed by your underground gambling debts, the deed and the mortgage were placed exclusively in my name. You have zero legal ownership of that property. You are nothing more than a guest. And your invitation has just been permanently revoked. No, Jason whispered, shaking his head. No, that cannot be right. It is entirely right, I assured him. The judge signed the eviction notice this morning along with the restraining order. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises. Because of your violent history and the active protective order, you are not allowed to go there alone. Detective Lawson has arranged for 2 armed police officers to escort you to the property at noon tomorrow. You will be given exactly 1 hour to pack your personal clothes into garbage bags under their direct supervision. If you attempt to take anything that belongs to me or Lily, you will be arrested for theft. Once that hour is up, you will hand over your keys and you will never step foot on my property again. Jason opened his mouth to argue, but a harsh sob tore through his throat instead. He was completely broken, stripped of his family, his money, and his home in less than 12 hours. Take him away, Chief Miller instructed the deputy. I watched in absolute silence as the deputy turned Jason around and marched him down the hallway toward the transport vehicle that would take him to the county jail. He did not look back. He just kept his head down his shoulders, shaking with defeat. I turned to Chief Miller and Detective Lawson, thanking them for their swift professionalism. I walked out of the police headquarters, the morning sun warming my face. I had a house to secure, a daughter to comfort, and a brand new, beautifully independent life to begin. 3 weeks passed since that morning in the sun. The transition from a chaotic nightmare to a quiet, structured reality was remarkably swift. I secured my house, changed every lock, and focused entirely on Lily's recovery. She healed beautifully, her resilience a daily reminder of why I had fought so hard. But while our lives were moving forward into peace, Brenda's world was collapsing with the spectacular velocity of a dying star. The financial guillotine had completely severed her from the reality she had known. The first domino to fall was her logistics company. Just as Jasmine predicted, the bank called in the $3 million loan the exact Monday following the wedding debacle. Without my top secret security clearance acting as collateral, and with the Department of Defense blacklist permanently barring her from federal bids, the bank showed absolutely no mercy. Brenda's corporate accounts were frozen within 48 hours. Unable to make payroll or cover basic operational costs, her board of directors panicked. They forced her out as chief executive officer on a Tuesday, and by Friday morning, the company officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The public humiliation was incredibly absolute. But the true agony for Brenda was not just the loss of the business itself. It was the immediate chilling abandonment by her high society friends. The very same people who had happily drank her expensive champagne at the wedding reception simply vanished into thin air. When Brenda desperately tried to call her wealthy investors and country club acquaintances for character references or financial loans to cover her mounting legal fees, she was met with disconnected numbers and polite but firm rejections from personal assistants, leaving her to face the brutal justice system completely without a single ally to lean on. I saw the physical toll of this isolation when I walked into the county courthouse for her formal arraignment. I wore my Air Force service dress uniform, a deliberate choice to remind the court of the federal implications of her crimes. I took a seat in the front row of the gallery flanked by Major Davis and Detective Lawson. Jasmine and Eric sat right beside me, presenting a unified front of the family she had tried to destroy. The courtroom was cold, the mahogany benches unyielding and the air thick with anticipation. The heavy wooden doors beside the judge's bench opened and a bailiff led Brenda into the courtroom. A collective murmur rippled through the gallery. The woman who walked to the defense table was completely unrecognizable from the arrogant socialite who had assaulted my daughter. Stripped of her designer gowns and her expensive jewelry, Brenda looked incredibly small. She wore a standard-issue orange county jail jumpsuit that hung loosely on her shrinking frame. Her blonde hair, once perfectly coiffed, was now a dull graying mess tied back in a harsh knot. She shuffled to her seat, her wrists shackled to a waist chain, her eyes glued to the floor. She did not even have Gregory Pierce to defend her. She was represented by a completely exhausted public defender who looked like he had barely read her file. The presiding judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for nonsense, called the court to order. She read the charges aloud, her voice echoing through the room. Felony child endangerment, aggravated assault on a minor, criminal conspiracy to commit fraud, filing a false police report. Every single syllable sounded like a nail being driven into Brenda's coffin. When asked for a plea, her public defender quietly entered a plea of not guilty. Then came the bail hearing. The public defender stood up attempting to argue that Brenda was a first-time offender with deep ties to the community and no longer posed a flight risk since her assets had been frozen. He requested she be released on her own recognizance or a minimal cash bond so she could prepare her defense from home. The prosecuting attorney, a sharp man who had worked closely with Detective Lawson, stood up and forcefully objected. "Your Honor, the state vehemently opposes any form of bail for this defendant," he stated. The defendant's so-called ties to the community were built entirely on a foundation of corporate fraud and tax evasion, both of which are currently under federal investigation. Furthermore, we have irrefutable video evidence of the defendant committing a violent, unprovoked assault against a 10-year-old child. The prosecutor pointed directly at me. But the most alarming factor is the defendant's brazen attempt to weaponize local law enforcement against the victim's mother, an active-duty senior officer in the military. The defendant made calculated terroristic threats against a military officer's child to protect her own corrupt financial interests. She explicitly threatened to use her private wealth to take custody of the child to silence the mother. Releasing her poses a severe immediate threat to the victims and the integrity of the ongoing federal investigation. The judge looked down at Brenda, who was trembling so violently that the chains around her waist rattled against the table. "I have reviewed the security footage and the preliminary financial audits," the judge said. "Your actions demonstrate a shocking disregard for human life and the law. The defendant is deemed an extreme risk to the community and the victims. Bail is unequivocally denied. You will be remanded to the custody of the county jail pending trial." The gavel slammed down with a loud crack. No, Brenda whimpered, her voice cracking as two bailiffs immediately stepped forward to grab her arms. The bailiffs ignored her pathetic pleas, hauling her to her feet and turning her toward the holding cell doors. She was led away in handcuffs, completely isolated. She had driven away her family, alienated her friends, and destroyed her son. She had absolutely nothing left. I did not smile and I did not look away. I simply watched her disappear behind the heavy steel doors, the clanking of her chains fading into cold silence. 2 weeks after watching Brenda disappear into the county jail system, I found myself sitting in a completely different courtroom. This time, the battle was not about federal contracts or criminal assault. It was about severing the final legal tie to the toxic family that had tried to destroy me. It was the day of my divorce hearing. I sat at the respondent table wearing a crisp charcoal suit. I did not need to wear my uniform today because my legal representation spoke volumes on my behalf. Thanks to my military position, I had retained one of the most formidable family law attorneys in the state, a former military prosecutor who specialized in high-stakes custody battles. Jason arrived late. He did not look like the confident, wealthy heir who had worn a custom tuxedo to his brother's wedding just a few weeks prior. He looked completely defeated. Since the police had escorted him out of my house, he had been living in a cheap, rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. His clothes hung loosely on his shrinking frame, and the stress of the impending federal fraud charges had visibly aged him. He sat at the petitioner table next to a discount family law attorney he had likely scraped his last few dollars together to hire. The judge, a no-nonsense man with decades of experience on the bench, called the docket. Jason's attorney immediately stood up and launched into a preposterous opening statement. He had the sheer audacity to request joint physical custody of Lily and a substantial monthly alimony payment. He argued that Jason had grown accustomed to a certain standard of living during our marriage, and that my demanding schedule as a military officer made me an unfit primary caregiver. Jason actually sat up a little straighter as his lawyer spoke. He clung to the delusion that the family court system would somehow reward his abhorrent behavior just because he was technically unemployed and facing bankruptcy. He actually thought he could use my federal salary to fund his new motel lifestyle. When Jason's lawyer finally sat down, my attorney stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not use theatrical gestures. She simply approached the bench and handed the judge a massive, perfectly organized binder of evidence. Your Honor, my attorney began, smoothly opposing counsel's request for joint custody, is not only absurd, it is actively dangerous to the minor child. I direct your attention to Exhibit A. My attorney pressed a button on her remote, and the large television screen in the courtroom flickered to life. It played the 4K security footage from the hotel ballroom. The judge watched intently as Brenda violently shoved Lily into the solid marble pillar. But more importantly for this specific hearing, the judge watched Jason stand completely still and do absolutely nothing while his daughter bled on the floor. My attorney let the heavy silence hang in the air after the video ended. The petitioner did not intervene when his mother assaulted his child, she stated clearly. Furthermore, we have attached the official police transcript where the petitioner actively lied to law enforcement, attempting to frame my client for that very assault. He demonstrated a complete failure to protect his child, making any form of custody entirely out of the question. The judge looked over his glasses at Jason, his expression hardening into pure, unadulterated disgust. Jason shrank down in his chair, suddenly realizing that family court was not going to be a safe haven. As for the request for spousal support, my attorney continued turning the page of her notes. The petitioner claims he needs financial assistance to maintain his lifestyle. However, forensic financial audits, which are included in Exhibit B, prove that the petitioner's lifestyle was funded entirely by criminal embezzlement. My attorney laid out the exact numbers Jasmine had uncovered during her audit. She detailed the hundreds of thousands of dollars Jason had siphoned from his mother's logistics company and wired directly to underground casinos. She explained that Jason was not a dependent spouse who had sacrificed his career for our marriage. He was an active fraudster who had secretly saddled our marital estate with massive liabilities. Furthermore, my attorney added, delivering the final crushing legal blow. The petitioner is currently under active investigation by the Internal Revenue Service for tax evasion related to those stolen funds. Awarding alimony to a man who will likely use those funds to pay off illegal gambling debts or federal tax penalties is a gross misapplication of justice. Jason's cheap attorney slowly lowered his head, rubbing his temples in defeat. He had clearly not been informed about the full extent of the criminal investigations or the existence of the security footage. He realized he had walked blindfolded into a slaughterhouse. The judge did not even need to call a recess to deliberate. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the heavy wooden desk. He looked directly at Jason. In my 20 years on the bench, the judge said, his voice echoing with authoritative finality, I have rarely seen a parent demonstrate such a profound lack of basic protective instinct. The judge picked up his pen. I am denying the request for joint custody. Abigail is hereby granted sole legal and sole physical custody of the minor child. The petitioner's visitation rights are completely suspended pending a comprehensive psychological evaluation and the conclusion of his criminal trials. If visitation is ever reinstated, it will be strictly supervised at the petitioner's expense. The judge then turned to the financial demands. Regarding spousal support, the request is unequivocally denied. You do not get to embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars, gamble it away, and then demand your ex-wife foot the bill for your criminal lifestyle. The marital assets, specifically the primary residence purchased under the respondent's Veterans Affairs loan, remain solely with the respondent. You are entitled to absolutely nothing. The gavel struck the sounding block with a loud crack. The marriage was over. I was officially free. I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket, and walked out of the courtroom. Jason chased after me into the bright corridor, looking entirely panicked. Abigail, wait, he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. How am I supposed to survive? The IRS sent an agent to my motel this morning. They are auditing everything I have ever touched. I cannot afford to eat. I have nothing left. I paused and looked at the man I had once thought I would spend the rest of my life with. I felt no anger left in my heart. I felt no sorrow. I only felt complete, liberating apathy. You should have thought about that before you chose your mother's business deal over your bleeding daughter, I replied evenly. Good luck with the audit, Jason. I turned my back on him for the last time and walked down the hallway, leaving him standing entirely alone with the consequences of his own cowardice. 6 months passed since I walked out of that courthouse. The cold, sterile air of the legal system faded, replaced by the warm, golden sunshine of a perfect Sunday afternoon. I stood on the back porch of my home, holding a glass of iced tea, and took a deep breath. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and roasting hickory wood. There were no looming threats, no toxic whispers, and no narcissistic grandstanding. There was only peace. I watched my daughter dart across the lush green lawn. Lily was 11 now, and the horrific events of her uncle's wedding reception felt like a distant nightmare. Her severe concussion had healed completely, leaving only a tiny faint scar near her hairline that was easily hidden by her dark curls. She was laughing hysterically, tossing a brightly colored frisbee to a clumsy, overly enthusiastic golden retriever puppy we had adopted a few months prior. Watching her run free from the anxiety and tension that used to permeate our household when Jason was around was the greatest victory of my life. Over by the brick barbecue pit, Eric was carefully flipping burgers, a pair of silver tongs in one hand and a spatula in the other. He was wearing a faded college t-shirt and denim shorts, looking completely relaxed. 6 months ago, Eric had made the most difficult but necessary decision of his life. He had legally and emotionally severed every single tie to his mother and brother. When Brenda was indicted and Jason's embezzlement was made public, Eric did not try to save their sinking ship. He recognized the rot at the core of his biological family and chose to walk away before it infected his own future. Jasmine walked out of the kitchen sliding door carrying a large wooden bowl of potato salad. She looked absolutely radiant. The heavy, suffocating pressure of trying to fit into Brenda's high society mold was completely gone. She set the bowl down on the picnic table and walked over to wrap her arms around her husband's waist. They shared a quiet, genuine smile that spoke volumes about the strength of their partnership. They had not let the absolute disaster of their wedding day define their marriage. Instead, they had used the ashes of that night to build something incredible. In the wake of the logistics company's spectacular bankruptcy, Eric and Jasmine had taken a massive leap of faith. Combining his brilliant mind for operational management and her unparalleled skills as a forensic accountant, they had launched their own boutique consulting firm. They specialized in helping small businesses identify financial vulnerabilities and streamline their supply chains. Their firm was built on absolute transparency, ethical practices, and hard work. There were no hidden ledgers, no offshore trusts, and no desperate attempts to secure government contracts through deceit. They were thriving, proving that success did not require stepping on the throats of others. I walked down the wooden steps of the porch and joined them on the patio. Jasmine turned to me, wiping her hands on an apron. "The burgers smell amazing," I said, taking a seat at the patio table. Eric grinned, tapping the tongs against the grill. "It is a secret family marinade," he joked. "But honestly, everything tastes better when you are not constantly looking over your shoulder, waiting for the next disaster to strike." His words were light, but they carried a profound weight. We all knew exactly what he meant. We did not talk about Jason or Brenda very often. The local news had covered Brenda's conviction a few weeks ago. She had taken a plea deal to avoid a lengthy public trial resulting in a 5-year sentence in a federal minimum security facility, plus massive financial restitution to the IRS that guaranteed she would spend the rest of her life in absolute poverty. Jason, meanwhile, was still awaiting his own trial, living in that cheap motel and working a minimum wage night shift job to afford his discount attorney. Their names were relics of a past life we had all collectively decided to leave behind forever. Instead, we talked about the future. Jasmine excitedly shared the details of a new client their firm had just signed, a local bakery looking to expand their operations. Eric asked me about my latest assignment at the base, genuinely interested in my work, rather than viewing my military career as a convenient financial safety net to exploit. As we sat there sharing food and laughter under the shade of the oak trees, the true meaning of the word family became incredibly clear to me. For a decade, I had bought into the toxic lie that family was strictly defined by bloodlines and marriage certificates. I had allowed myself to be bullied, manipulated, and gaslit because I believed I owed my in-laws my absolute loyalty simply because of a legal document. But looking at Jasmine, the woman who had ruined her own wedding dress to stop my child's bleeding, and Eric, the man who had abandoned his toxic roots to stand by the truth, I realized how wrong I had been. Family is not an obligation you are born into or marry into. It is a continuous active choice. Family is the people who show up for you in the cold, sterile waiting room of an emergency department. Family is the people who believe you when you tell the truth, even when the lie is much more convenient. Family is the people who help you build boundaries, who respect your career, and who would never ever ask you to compromise the safety of your child to protect their own fragile egos. Lily ran up to the patio out of breath and grinning from ear to ear, the golden retriever trailing happily behind her. "Mommy, Uncle Eric says the burgers are almost ready," she announced, grabbing a carrot stick from the vegetable platter. "Can we roast marshmallows over the fire pit later tonight?" I smiled, pulling her into a quick hug and kissing the top of her head. "Absolutely, sweetheart," I promised. "We can stay out here as long as you want." As I looked around my backyard at the beautiful, peaceful life I had fought so fiercely to protect, my heart felt incredibly full. The war was a distant memory. The war was a distant memory. I stood on the wooden planks of my back porch, long after the sun had dipped below the horizon, replacing the bright golden afternoon with a deep, velvety twilight. The fire pit was now the absolute centerpiece of the yard, casting a warm, flickering orange glow across the faces of the people I loved most. Lily was sitting safely between Eric and Jasmine, expertly roasting a marshmallow on a long metal skewer. Her laughter floated up into the cool night air, a sound so pure and unbroken that it brought a sudden fierce sting of tears to my eyes. I took a slow sip of my iced tea, leaning against the wooden railing, and allowed myself to finally completely exhale. For 10 long years I had lived in a constant state of emotional hypervigilance, I had navigated the treacherous, unpredictable waters of my marriage, constantly trying to appease a husband who deeply resented my strength and a mother-in-law who viewed my existence as a personal insult to her pedigree. I had swallowed my pride, bitten my tongue, and compromised my own comfort in the name of keeping the peace. I had convinced myself that enduring their subtle cruelty was the honorable thing to do, that being the bigger person meant absorbing their toxicity without a single complaint. I had believed the absolute lie that family was an unbreakable bond, even when that bond was wrapped around my neck like a heavy iron chain. But as I watched the flames dance in the fire pit, I realized the profound, terrifying danger of that mindset. Toxic people do not respect your silence. They do not view your patience as a virtue. They view it as an open invitation to push harder, to take more, to test exactly how far they can cross the line before you finally break. Brenda and Jason had looked at my quiet demeanor and my desperate desire for family harmony, and they had mistaken it for total weakness. They had looked at my modest lifestyle and my quiet dedication to my military service, and they had mistaken it for powerlessness. They were so blindly intoxicated by their own arrogance, so obsessed with the superficial markers of wealth and status, that they completely failed to recognize the sleeping giant they were aggressively provoking. They thought they held absolutely all the cards because they had an exclusive country club membership and a fleet of corporate logistics trucks. They genuinely believed that when push came to shove, I would simply fold, just as Jason had always folded to his mother's endless demands. But they made a catastrophic, life-altering miscalculation. They forgot that I was not just a tired wife trying to keep a fractured family together. They forgot that I was a mother. And more dangerously, they forgot that I was a mother trained by the United States military to identify, neutralize, and completely dismantle hostile threats. When Brenda violently dragged my daughter across that polished dance floor, when she pushed her into that solid marble pillar and left her bleeding on the ground, she crossed a boundary that fundamentally altered the fabric of my reality. In that terrifying fraction of a second, the accommodating quiet wife died entirely, and the commanding officer took over. But the honest truth is, the silver eagles pinned to my dress blues were never my primary weapon. The high military rank, the top secret security clearance, the unilateral federal authority to cancel her multi-million-dollar contract, those were simply the logistical tools I utilized to execute my strategy. They thought my rank gave me my power. They were wrong. My power comes from being a mother, and you never ever mess with a soldier's child. The immense strength required to stand up in that hospital room, to silently gather the security footage, and to look my betraying husband in the eye without shedding a single tear did not come from my military training. It came from the absolute, uncompromising devotion I have for my daughter. It came from the fierce primal instinct to protect my child from the monsters hiding in expensive designer clothing. I did what I had to do, not out of petty vengeance, but out of a profound, radical sense of self-respect and maternal duty. I burned their toxic empire to the ground so that my daughter would never have to breathe in the ashes. Establishing boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. It is looking the people who hurt you directly in the eye and permanently revoking their access to your peace. Walking away from Brenda and Jason was not a failure of my marriage or my family. It was the most successful, empowering rescue mission of my entire life. I rescued myself, and more importantly, I rescued Lily. We are no longer collateral damage in someone else's narcissistic narrative. We are the authors of our own story, and the chapters ahead are filled with light, truth, and genuine love. I stepped off the wooden porch and walked toward the glowing fire pit, ready to join my real family. The cool grass beneath my bare feet grounded me securely in the present moment. I sat down next to Jasmine, who handed me a perfectly toasted marshmallow with a warm smile. I looked at Lily, whose eyes were bright and completely devoid of fear. I knew there would still be hard days ahead, challenges to face, and deep healing to continue. But I also knew that my fortress was finally secure. The perimeter was established, and the wolves would never breach these walls again. If you are watching this and you are currently trapped in the suffocating grip of a toxic family dynamic, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You do not owe your abusers your loyalty. You do not owe your peace of mind to people who consistently choose to disrespect you. Your worth is not determined by how much cruelty you can endure in the name of family. It is determined by the boundaries you have the courage to set and maintain. Have you ever had to draw a hard line in the sand with family members who completely underestimated your strength? Have you ever had to walk away from people who thought they could control you, only to discover your own incredible power in the process? I would love to read your stories of establishing boundaries and reclaiming your life in the comments below. We draw immense strength from each other's victories, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to finally take their own life back. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more authentic stories of resilience, justice, and personal growth. Share this video with anyone who might need a vital reminder that true power does not come from wealth, titles, or status. It comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to let anyone disrespect the people you love. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey. Keep protecting your peace, keep holding your boundaries firm, and I will see you in the next story.